Okay, everybody, can everybody hear me? Try to. All right. Okay, cool. Well, I guess we will. I want to start. I have some Q&A questions lined up. I'm going to get us warmed up. And if anybody comes up with anything else they want to discuss, feel free to holler at me in the chat. One thing I want to get out of the way is we did have some technical issues before. I'm trying to experiment with, I got this microphone. It's supposed to be a good microphone, and it is. And I think it's not my microphone. It's YouTube. For whatever reason, if I speak or sing on these live streams, it sounds pretty good. But when I go to pick the banjo sounds like hell. And it'll start cutting out, sounding like it's underwater. It's a problem that other people experience with their music live streams. So I don't know. If anybody can help me out with that, help me figure out how to fix that, because I would love to be able to play music in these live streams. I just don't want to even bother picking the banjo on these live streams anymore, because at least until I figure out this audio issue, because it sounds terrible and I feel like it's kind of pointless. So without further ado, let's get into some Q&A questions that people have submitted recently. Yeah, Rise Up 144 says I should find another streaming service. I think you're right. YouTube is kind of the king when it comes to actually turning a dollar at this stuff. I've done live streams before with other platforms, and my audio sounded great apparently. So it really is a YouTube thing. YouTube throttles me probably because we don't have that many people. Hey Blaine, hey Josh. Okay, so Rod Shop 1969 says, when and how did you decide to sing in front of your family, and how did that go? The first time I ever sang in front of my family with the banjo is probably what you really mean, because I mean, as a kid, I grew up singing since I was a little kid. Like my mom and dad, particularly my father, taught me how to sing. First song I ever learned was Froggy Went A-Courtin'. Froggy went a-courtin' and he did ride with the ki-yi kitchy ki-me-yo, sword and a pistol by his side with the ki-yi kitchy ki-me-yo. So that was a song that I learned very early on from my father. So I sang in front of the family from as long as I could remember. But with the banjo, that was always a little awkward. And I remember the first time I ever did that, I had just gotten George Gibson's CD, Last Possum Up the Tree. And there's a song on there. The first song on that CD is Last Gold Dollar, GCGCD. And that was the first song I ever learned by ear. Like I actually figured it out by ear using the overhand style, not just finger picking around. And I stayed up all night on a school night, all night, trying to figure out that song. And so the first family member I ever sung in front of was my mother that morning. She woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready to go to work. And I said, hey, Mom, I've been up all night figuring out this song. Let me play it for you. And I think I was 14 years old. And I played it and sang it for her. And she was like, what the fuck? I guess she'd never seen me do that before. And then she went to work, I guess. And I think I skipped school that day. And just stayed home and played the banjo. I started doing that. I got a little sideways there around the age of 14. I would go walk out to the bus stop and hang out. My mother would drive by the bus stop and she'd see me at the bus stop, so she knew I was going to school. And as soon as my mother drove by to go to work, I'd walk back home, and a lot of what I was doing all day was playing the damn banjo. So Landon's asking me, do I remember my first banjo? Yeah, my first banjo was a gold tone Cripple Creek. My dad paid $100 for it at a used music store that I believe is still in West Columbia in South Carolina. It's called Bill's Pick and Parlor. And yeah, it was a gold tone Cripple Creek, $100 back in the day. That was like 1998 or something. So Jackson says, where do I get a big piece of red oak? Well, that depends, Jackson, on what do you want, like a piece of red oak for a neck, or a piece of a big red oak board for a mountain banjo, for example. You can get that at Home Depot, man. It won't be cheap. Wood is very expensive right now, especially at Home Depot. So just be prepared to pay for it. If you're looking for a block for a neck, you need at least 2.5 by 2.5 inches, and maybe at least 25 inches long, something like that. So you're going to have to get that either from a lumber yard. Sometimes you can go to a place that actually sells what they call turning blanks, but probably this day and age, you're going to have to order a turning blank. And yeah, but you know, and red oak will make a decent banjo neck. It's not ideal for the neck, but it will work. It's ideal for the pot. Red oak is the best for the rim pot of the banjo. So Ryan Callahan says, hey, Clifton, I bought a cheap Chinese-made banjo to start out, and I'm not happy with how it sounds. To me, it sounds more like a guitar with banjo strings, if that makes sense. Yes, it does. Do you have any ideas on how to make it sound brighter and more banjo-like, or any ideas of a better banjo I could buy? A better cheap Chinese banjo I'm pointing people towards these days is a Recording King Dirty 30s. They're not terribly well made, but for what they are, they're better than most of these. Like if you're playing like an Ida or I don't know, they're better. I think they're better than the Deering Goodtime. They're better than most of the gold tones. So Recording King is an option. You don't want to pay more than about $200 for a Dirty 30s Recording King. But most important thing to make a cheap, shitty banjo sound more like a banjo, and this is a problem that you will encounter with the cheap banjos, or really with any banjo that's not set up perfectly. And they'll sound just like a guitar, and you're wondering, where's that banjo sound? How do I get that? What you need is an adjustable tailpiece. Most even cheap instrument banjos nowadays come with an adjustable tailpiece. And what you want to do is, you'll see, let's say this is the head of your banjo, your bridge is right here, your tailpiece is back here. And usually on the very back of the tailpiece, if it's adjustable, there'll be a knob that you can tighten or loosen. So what you want to do is you want to twist that tailpiece until, like, these are your strings coming up to your bridge. You want to twist that tailpiece knob and make your tailpiece come down like that. If it's up like that, it's going to make more of an open guitar sound. If you ratchet that tailpiece down behind the bridge, put lots of pressure, maximum pressure behind that bridge, it'll make your banjo sound a lot more like a banjo. And people say, how far down should that tailpiece go? My rule of thumb is I twist it down all the way, ideally until it's actually touching the banjo head. And once it's touching the banjo head, you don't want to do that because that'll muffle it. Make it touch the banjo head and then back it off a hair. It's kind of like setting the headspace and timing on a 50 cal machine gun. It kind of reminds me of that. You do it all the way and then you back it off a little bit. Anyhow, let's see here. Where do I get a big piece of red oak? We answered that. Sean O'Rourke has an interesting question here I want to address. Sean says, was the banjo popular pre-Civil War in the 1830s sort of era? So yeah, Sean, I mean, so people will argue about this. If you ask me, and I think I'm right, the banjo was already popular by about 1740, believe it or not. And that's when you see the first earliest accounts, and if you're talking about mainland North America, the earliest account in mainland North America, I believe it's about 1740, late 1700s, 1740 in New York City. And the guy just says, yeah, he describes walking out of New York into the countryside outside of town. And he's observing a bunch of black people having a party, a Pentecost party. And there's a banjo present. And this, I want to say, is the late 1730s. And you can tell by the way some of these early accounts discuss the banjo. They don't describe what it is. They don't act like it's this strange alien thing they've never seen before. They merely say in these earliest accounts, this person was playing a banjo. And the reader is just assumed to already have seen a banjo, heard it. And this is in New York City. So shortly thereafter, you get a flood of banjo accounts from places like Maryland and Virginia, all through beginning in the 1740s. And these are mostly from runaway slave advertisements in the newspaper, where they say, you know, the subscriber so-and-so is reporting that his slave ran away. He may have a banjo with him, or he's a good banjo player, etc. And again, in all of those advertisements, they're not explaining what the banjo is, because by 1740, if you lived in Maryland or Virginia, you were already very familiar with the banjo. So honestly, I want to say by 1750, the banjo was already very widespread. It probably didn't enjoy a lot of popularity in the so-called white community, but among enslaved people, among indentured servants, it was well known. And certainly by 1780, we know for a fact that it was a solid central part of even lower class, working class white folk culture, because you have all kinds of accounts come out in the 1770s, 1780s of white folks dancing to the banjo. So again, I always say I don't really care what color these people are, but it is important to observe and note when the banjo quote unquote jumped the color line. And it happened very early on. It happened in the 1700s. And it just indicates how widespread and how popular the instrument had become. By 1780, we have white people and rural white people in North Carolina are dancing to the gourd banjo. In 1790 in Kentucky, we have a group of Virginians that came from Appomattox Courthouse. They carried their slaves with them over the mountain, over Cumberland Gap, trying to get into Kentucky. This was 1781. There's an account of them forcing the slaves to play the banjo for them at one point. So we know it was a big deal. And then as early as 1790, we have an account of a guy whose name, we only know his name was Mr. Rector. Locals called him Old Leatherstocking. Old Leatherstocking Rector in East Kentucky in the 1790s. He's documented as making banjo strings from deer intestines. They don't mention him playing, but they mention that those deer gut banjo strings were just as important to him as his food and clothing. So that to me tells me that Old Leatherstocking, who presumably was Caucasian, was Anglo-American, that tells me that Old Leatherstocking, Mr. Rector, he was a banjo player. So Sean, if you want to talk about mainstream popularity of the banjo, yes, that was not until the 1830s. And that was when you had really Joel Sweeney in the 1830s blacked himself up and became the first minstrel. There were blackface minstrels before Joe Sweeney, who was a Virginian, sort of middle upper class Virginian, but he was the first blackface minstrel to actually bring the banjo to the minstrel stage. He played in circuses and eventually on the stage. And he was also the first guy that's one thing that's interesting about Sweeney is that every single account of the banjo before Sweeney, it's described, when it is described, as a gourd instrument, usually with just 3 or 4 strings or less. But as soon as Sweeney hits the stage, the gourd banjo almost disappears from the historical record, and the 3 and 4 string banjos almost disappear from the historical record. Suddenly, in the 1830s, with the rise of Sweeney, you see the round wooden frame bent wood hoop banjo with an actual wooden pot and 5 strings. So that's led a lot of people to claim sort of wild things that Sweeney invented the 5-string banjo, etc., which there's no evidence, there's no reason to believe that. I'm sure that Sweeney just basically learned everything from the slaves on his father's plantation outside of Lynchburg, And I imagine that that's what those enslaved musicians were playing on. They, you know, the technology required to steam bend a hoop and make a drum and put a neck on it, that was clearly already around. Anyhow, I could talk at length about that, and I already have. So Blaine is asking me sort of a funny question that has nothing to do with the banjo. He has found out somehow that I had a nickname in the Army where they called me the Mad Shitter. And I've promised that I would explain why they called me the Mad Shitter. I had several nicknames in the Army. The first nickname I got was the Mad Shitter. And so it's a play on the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. And it's also a play on this guy, this character that was in Iraq at the time that we were there. This is 2003, right after the invasion. We used to get mortared all the time. So if you guys aren't familiar, a mortar is basically, it's an artillery tube, and you drop a light artillery shell down the tube. It hits a primer, it hits a firing pin at the bottom, sets that shell off, goes thump, boom, and it blows up. And so it's a great close range weapon because the Iraqis could pull up pretty close to our perimeter, and they could hang, we called it hanging mortars. They could hang these mortar shells and drop them down the tube, thump, and thump them over our perimeter wall, and they would land in our proximity. None of us ever got killed by them, but I think we had some people get wounded, and we had some damaged vehicles and some, you know, so it scared the hell out of us. They used to drop mortars on us every damn day. So, but our name for the Iraqis who mortared us, we called them all the Mad Mortarmen. And because it was just, we couldn't believe that they were actually doing that to us. So everybody, whenever the mortars started landing on our base, we'd say, oh shit, there comes the Mad Mortarmen again. And, or we would go out and try to catch these guys. We would say we were going out to get the Mad Mortarmen. So I got the nickname Mad Shitter thanks to the Mad Mortarmen one time. We were out late at night on the front gate of the base. Our base was a little place called Camp Slayer. And I was pulling guard duty on the tank. And long story short, it was the first time I'd ever been on guard duty out there. And it was late at night. Everybody else on the tank fell asleep, which they're not supposed to do. And I had to relieve myself. And I was so scared I wasn't about to wake them up. So long story short, I put the night vision goggles on my head. I grabbed an M16 and dropped my pants, climbed out of the tank, and I hung off the back of the tank, off the side of the tank turret, and I took a dump off the side of the tank. And I cleaned off my body, and I went back inside and felt pretty good about myself. And the next morning when the sun came up, the sergeant of the guard came around to relieve us. And part of his duties is to do a walk around of the tank before he relieves us. And as he was doing his walk around of the tank, he finds this big pile of shit right next to the tank. And he said, who the hell shit next to the tank? And I poked my head up out of the turret and I said, oh, that was me, Sergeant. And I got in big trouble because I didn't know as an 18-year-old, you know, I didn't think anybody cared if I took a shit out there. But apparently that was against the rules. And they mostly thought it was funny, but I got in big trouble too. And they started calling me the Mad Shitter. So there's your story, Blaine. Thank you for making me tell that. I didn't want to. So Justin Gibbs gave us $5. Thank you, Justin. He says, the devil song that you have sung about the farmer and his wife, I learned on the guitar by the name of Bugger Man in the Booger. Is it Bugger Man or Booger Man? Booger Man in the Bushes. Have you ever heard it before? Justin, I've never heard Booger Man in the Bushes. Is it the same damn song? I never heard that. So Duffy says his tattoo artist referred him to my music. That's cool. That's good to know. I like to imagine that people in sort of dingy, smoke-filled rooms somewhere are listening to my music. That's cool. Chuck It All says, I used alder wood for my cigar box guitars. It worked out really well. I've never used alder. So Landon asks, why do people stereotype banjo players as hillbillies? Well, well, Landon, for one, I mean, you know, a lot of us are hillbillies. I'm a flatlander, so I would never dare to call myself a hillbilly, but I am a cracker. And so a lot of us are hillbillies. That's one reason. And but that stereotype, really, you know, to be serious about it, that goes back to probably before the 1830s. 'Cause, I mean, think, you know, we were just talking about Joe Sweeney and the rise of the popularity of the banjo with blackface minstrels on the stage. And most of that popularity was up north. People in the South already knew the banjo. Primarily, it was a black instrument, an instrument of the lower classes, specifically enslaved people. So in the South, people didn't really think much of it. You either were into it or you weren't, and that's one reason why it was almost never written about in the South before the 1830s. But you had Joe Sweeney and all these other minstrels, Billy Whitlock and Dan Emmett and all these people. Most of those guys were all Yankees. Most of those guys were from cities, urban centers in Ohio, New York, etc. And it's kind of just like how it is now. They made the banjo popular in the mainstream, and they did it as a hillbilly instrument. I mean, really, the hillbilly, for lack of a better term, the earliest minstrel songs and the earliest minstrel characters are, yes, they're black, but they're backwoodsmen. They're enslaved, but they're these real rugged, rough black guys who the early minstrel songs. Like Jump Jim Crow, for example. It's kind of like the modern like hip hop rap, like gangster kind of stuff. These guys are bragging about how they can whip their weight in wildcats. They tear up more ground than a wagon load of taters. They brag about how tough they are and stuff. So from a very early time, with the banjo was made popular and commercialized as this kind of redneck, rough hillbilly backwoods instrument. And of course, a lot of that stereotype drew on truth. I mean, it was an instrument that was mostly played by working class people, and primarily in the back country and on the frontier areas, and certainly on the plantations and stuff too. And Landon, I mean, it's the stereotype persists because it works. It makes money, and it makes money for who are the people who print the music? Who are the people who make the instructional videos for the most part? Who are the people who put on the concerts and the festivals? Just like in the 1830s, just like today, it's all Yankees. It's all, and I'm not saying that like disparagingly, but it's all urban people, mostly from the North, coastal elites, if you will. And it's been that way since the 1830s. So the stereotype persists because it makes money. And then a lot of it is that movie Deliverance. Now, Landon, I know you're underage, so I don't want to refer you to go watch Deliverance because it's a very graphic film. You should maybe watch it when you're older. But there's a scene in that film early on where there's basically this little retarded mountain boy who plays the banjo. And that came out in the 70s and was wildly popular. And so that just stuff like that, it just makes it works. People will pay to see it. Pretty much anytime if I play the banjo at a neighbor's house or something, somebody will always mention the movie Deliverance because it has such a deep impact on people's psyche. And as you all have noticed, it's socially acceptable to disparage hillbillies, rednecks, crackers. Nobody will ever be canceled for making fun of a redneck or something like that. So it works, and the stereotypes persist. So Jacob Bernard says, do you know how the four-string banjo made its way into Irish music? Well, Jacob, I want to say that happened either immediately before or immediately after the First World War. So it happened in the early 1900s. Right around that time, jazz blew up. And jazz, came from America, but it was really popular in Europe, in places like France, in Paris, in London, even in Berlin, of course. Berlin was a huge center of jazz music before like the Nazis kind of came to power after World War I. And as a lot of you probably know, jazz music is not typically played. It is not anymore. And even then, it was not played on the five-string banjo. It was played mostly on four-string tenor banjos, on plectrums, and on six-string banjos. So I think it has something to do with that. And you'll notice World War I killed a lot of the 5-string banjo manufacturing all over the world. But most of them were made in England and mostly in the States. And the buildup to World War I, just like World War II, they had to restrict what you could make. So a lot of banjo factories shut down, because think of what banjos were made out of. They're made out of hardwood, bone, and think of all that metal, brass, nickel-plated brass, and tin and all this other stuff that they used, but mostly it was nickel-plated brass and German silver. All of that metal had to be used to manufacture stuff for the war effort. So World War I killed the banjo industry. And after the war ended and they started building banjos again, they kind of like stopped building 5-string banjos after World War I. You didn't see a lot of 5-string banjos built in the period between World War I and World War II. So around that time is when the banjo is really first popularized in Ireland. As you know, in England, the 5-string, 6-string, 7-string banjos were very popular from the 1850s onward. But for whatever reason, and I think it has something to do with, I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the banjo was introduced in Ireland when the 4-string tenor plectrum banjos were at the peak of their popularity right around World War I. And the Irish people they grabbed those 4-string banjos and they just took off with them. That is my understanding of how that happened. Okay. Oh, this is a good comment here, if I can find it again. So 8-Wheeled Assassin says, interesting history on this. Often early slave culture was closely intertwined with poor Scots-Irish culture. The color line was not as defined as we often assume. That's true, especially early on. The color line was quickly defined going into the 1700s. So by the middle 1700s, yes, I mean, race relations were very stratified in this country. But in the 1600s, going into the early 1700s, you had a lot of intermingling of different races going in there. So leading up to the explosion of the banjo, which I would argue really happened in the 1740s, 1750s, the color lines was a lot more blurred, and you did have a lot of white indentured servants that were still hanging around in the South, and a lot of indentured servants and slaves were often quartered, almost always quartered in the same housing. Nobody cared if they interbred or intermarried. A lot of people ran away together. A lot of the first Anglo and Afro settlers in southern Appalachia were mixed race people their parents had been white indentured servants and black slaves. And these people were very quickly pushed west into the mountains. And although we don't have any proof of it, it hasn't been documented as of yet, I have a hunch that they carried the banjo with them, these early mixed race families going into the mountains that were being pushed into the mountains by things like race laws and marriage laws and taxation and not being allowed to vote or own property because they were mixed race. These people went up into the mountains, and I'll bet you they brought banjos with them. We'll never know because none of the banjos survive. And these people were undocumented. These were the original, undocumented Americans besides Native Americans. So that's very interesting. 8-Wheeled Assassin. I could talk about that until you're all very sick of hearing me talk about it. So Tim Harrelson asks, would a mid-1800s banjo have a fretted fingerboard, or could it be a smooth fret neck? So yes, Tim, frets on banjos started appearing, very early on, probably in the 1850s, 1860s is when you see your first fretted banjos, but it was not popular. The fretless was much more popular. And what you're talking about, where there are frets, but they're smooth, we call that flush fretted. That was pretty not common, but it was done. You really don't see a fretted banjo, either flush fret or regular raised frets as we think of them today. You don't really see that becoming standard until the 1880s, probably about 1885, I would say. almost all banjos, virtually almost all of them before the 1880s, most of them were fretless or flush fretted. And a lot of times those flush, smooth fret markers, they didn't mean very much, especially past the 5th fret. They were kind of just for decoration. Blaine says, I'm sorry, we got to laugh at your expense. Great story. I don't know if I could, I feel like I used to be a better storyteller when I was younger, but the mad shitter. And of course, I have a million. We could do a whole series on just weird military stories. I'd rather not. That was so long ago, 2003, man. So Turtle Jailer says they're listening in Bosnia. That's cool. I have been to Bulgaria one time, and one of the people I was staying with over there was, I believe she was from Bosnia. She was Serbian. She was from Serbia, and so she had been there when they were bombing, when the United States was bombing Serbia, and that's how her family fled Serbia in the middle of all that bombing, and she became an American. I haven't talked to those people in years. So Brave Fox says, do you know how to play Tom Dooley on the guitar? I've never tried to play Tom Dooley on the guitar. I can play Tom Dooley on the banjo till you're all red in the face. Tim Smith asks, can I be a hillbilly if I'm in Canada? Yeah, I mean, are there hills there? Hell yeah. So the term hillbilly, it goes back to England, like a lot of the stuff in our culture. It goes back to England or Africa or something like that. But the term hillbilly and the term redneck actually goes back to England. And these were people who lived up here. You have Scotland. Down here you have England. And in the middle you have that border region. That's where all the Scots-Irish people, are kind of from that area or Northern Ireland. And there are hills on that border region. And that's where the term hillbilly comes from. A lot of those boys were named William. And William is long for Bill or Billy. And so they became known as hillbillies very early on. And then the term redneck also comes from England in the 15 or the 1600s, when the Church of England first came out, and England was forced to switch from being a Catholic nation to a Protestant nation. A lot of religious dissenters lived in that border area, and not just Catholics, but there were, I think mainly the redneck term comes from people who were Protestants, but they rejected the Church of England. They were Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, etc. And some of the rebels who were involved in some of that political activity, I believe back in as early as the 15 or 1600s, they would wear a red rag around their neck as a way to, certain gangs would wear a red scarf around their neck or something as a way to identify themselves. And there was often a lot of violence and so forth. And the earliest mention of the use of the word redneck comes from England in that period, from religious dissenters, people who were dissenting against the Church of England, wearing a red neckerchief as a way to identify each other. So Andrew says, I was wondering what you think of the banjo plans in the Foxfire books, if you've seen them. I had to do a lot of repairs to my old East German openback and might try building one if I get time. Yeah, the first banjo I ever built was right out of that Foxfire book. It's Foxfire number 3. I've got 2 copies on the shelf back here in the hall. And Foxfire 3 is the way you want to go to build a mountain banjo. I think it's Foxfire number 6 teaches you how to make those kind of wonky gourd banjos that are kind of strange. Nobody really knows where those Foxfire gourd banjos come from. They're kind of strange. But the mountain banjo one is Foxfire number 3. And I do recommend that. It gives you the basics. You're going to have to figure a lot of stuff out on your own. They don't really tell you a lot of detail about how to do it. But my first banjo I ever built was right out of the Foxfire manual, and I was, I believe I was 16 years old. I had almost no woodworking experience, and my dad helped me build it. And I made a banjo that you could play. And so you can do it out of that Foxfire number 3. So Eric says, I'm just getting into this. I've been playing acoustic fingerstyle guitar for many years. I have a Deering Goodtime Americana and would like to convert the steel strings to nylon. Is this even possible? If so, how would I go about this? Do I need a new bridge? Okay, Eric, this is a question. I get this question all the time. Lots of people have a Deering Goodtime and they want to switch over to nylon strings. So I have heard that there's a certain type of nylon string that's called Labella number 17 nylons. I recommend these strings all the time. They're pretty cheap and they are very close to the gut strings that were historically available from the 1880s up into the 1940s. So the Labella number 17s are meant to kind of they're copying those old gut strings. So what you want to do is get Labella number 17s. If you go for the Aquila, the Nylgut strings, they're all really thick. Those are much heavier. And the trouble you're going to run into is that the thicker nylons and gut strings, they will not fit in those narrow slots on the nut of your Goodtime. They definitely won't fit in your bridge. But my understanding, I've been told recently that the Labella number 17s, some of y'all in the chat chime in, let us know if I'm correct on this. Labella number 17 nylons will fit most Goodtime nuts. Now you will need a new bridge. And where you want to go for your bridge, if you live in the US, you want to go to banjothimble.com. Banjothimble.com is run by Joel Hooks up in Vermont. He's making the best banjo bridges in the United States right now. So if you live on the west side of the Atlantic, go to banjothimble.com, just like a sewing thimble, banjo thimble. Order you a bridge from him. He makes all of his bridges. Most of them are made to fit Labella number 17 nylons. They'll go right on your Goodtime. You'll be in good shape. If you live in Europe or the United Kingdom, somewhere on the eastern side of the Atlantic, you probably want to go to Clifford Essex. And I believe that website is cliffordessex.net. I got it right here. cliffordessex.net. So that's a banjo company based out of England, and they're making probably the best banjo bridges in Europe right now. So that's what you want to do for your nylon strings. And like I said, they will fit on your Deering Goodtime. If you get the Labella number 17s, you'll just need a new bridge. The other problem a lot of people run into is the tailpiece often will cut the nylon strings. So you either want to look into getting a different tailpiece, like a no knot or a Kirschner, a nice quality Kirschner tailpiece, or if you just want to be cheap, just get a file or get a narrow toothpick or something wrapped in sandpaper, and go ahead and scour out the holes, all the contact points on your cheap modern bridge, because there's sharp spots on those bridges and they will cut nylon strings. So Blaine asks, was there ever a time in the United States where the banjo was outlawed? No, I don't think that's ever been put on the books. There are some historical examples of people calling the cops and getting noise complaints for people playing the banjo, like in the cities or whatever. People playing banjo late at night in New York and getting the cops called on. That did happen in the 1800s. George Gibson tells a hell of a story. I don't know if it happened to him or one of his friends, but they were walking home early one morning from a dance party. And this boy I think it was one of George's older friends, and he had his banjo over his shoulder, and he's walking home early, probably on a Sunday morning or something like that. And he passed this old timer on the dirt road, and this old man said, you should have a hoe on your shoulder instead of that idiot stick. This is in Knott County, Kentucky in the 1940s, I guess. And so a lot of religious people, especially in the South, and especially I believe in the Southern mountains, they really hated the banjo. They really looked down on the banjo and the fiddle, probably especially the banjo, because it was associated with black people and and drinking and all this other bullshit. So this old man actually referred to the young man's banjo as an idiot stick, and he said he'd be better off if he had a hoe on his shoulder instead of the banjo. And the hoe, if you guys aren't familiar, that's a farming implement. You should be out in the field working. You shouldn't be playing that damn banjo. So the banjo was never outlawed, as far as I know, anywhere. But it's definitely, clearly has been looked down upon since forever. I just had another thought. I mean, probably in places like Nazi Germany, they probably outlawed the banjo, because you guys know jazz was outlawed in Germany during in the 30s and during World War II. So the banjo was probably outlawed in Germany as well at that time. I never thought about that before, but I bet you it was. So Andrew says, I was wondering what you think of the banjo. Oh, we already covered that. That's Foxfire 3. Those are good plans. Molly says, will sliding the bridge on a banjo work as a capo like early minstrels used to do? I just heard about this last night. You can do that. With the fretted banjo, it's going to be tricky. It's going to throw everything off. The reason the minstrels got away with stuff like that is because they had these big, long scale fretless banjos. I've never really tried to do that. But on a fretless banjo, you can basically put the bridge anywhere you want. So it would work on a fretless. I'm not so sure about a typical fretted banjo. All right, JL Montesinos says he's listening, or he or she is listening in Mexico. That's cool. Always like to hear about people all over different parts of the country and the world participating here. So Simon asks, are you familiar with Japanese, the shamisen? Yeah, that's a little 3-string banjo kind of thing. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I've never played one. I've never seen one in real life, but I've seen videos on the internet. There's a lot of lutes out there all over Asia. It's not just West Africa and the Americas, but all over Asia, there are lutes with animal hide sound tables that sound like a damn banjo. And the shamisen is, I think that's how you pronounce it, is one of those instruments. They're great. They're fretless. They got 3 strings. They play them with a big wooden plectrum, and they get these crazy sound. I love it when they sing with them. There's also a video of, there's a famous video on YouTube of a guy who's throat singing through his nose, doing that wow kind of weird singing. And he's next to a kid who's picking a little 3-string banjo looking thing. Sounds just like a banjo. So Justin says, my grandfather came from around Middle Kentucky. I've started looking into traditional music there. Do you know of any good resources for banjo music of rural Kentucky in general? So Justin, yeah, you want to go to the first place I would send you to it's a website called the Alan Lomax Kentucky Recordings website. Most of that is East Kentucky. I mean, that's just where most of the folklorists went, but a lot of it's in Central Kentucky. One of the best banjo pickers, old songsters that they got on there is a guy named J.M. Mullins. J.M. Mullins, Mullins. And he was a guy who I believe he was actually from Eastern Kentucky. He was born somewhere in East Kentucky in the 1860s. Maybe, I'm not sure exactly where, and I believe they recorded him around Lexington or Louisville or something. So he was actually recorded in sort of in the middle part of Kentucky. Somebody who might know more about that is Jake Book, B-O-O-K. Jake has been living in northern Kentucky outside of Frankfort for many years now. He's probably more familiar with the music of Central Kentucky than I am. I'm not. But the Alan Lomax Kentucky Recordings website would be the first place I would look, because it's all of Kentucky. It's not just the mountains. A lot of us, I mean, I love the mountain music, but a lot of us get tired. We spend 20, 30 years researching mountain music, and what I'm really after is Southern music. Now, most Southern music was only really preserved in the mountains going in after World War II. So that's where we find most of the recordings. But really, truly, I'm interested in just mostly in music from the Southeast in general. I don't care if it's on the mountains, in the Piedmont, the coastal plain, the swamp. I don't care. I'm originally from the swampy coastal plain areas. I was born in Jacksonville. I grew up in Savannah. I feel most at home when I'm down in the swamps. So that's really what I'm mostly after. So Sarah Irwin says, hey, from New Zealand. Good banjos are hard to find here. Don't I know it? Do you have any recommendations for banjos that work well with pickups for live performance? I mean, any banjo, you put a pickup on it, it's going to work as well as any others. I can't think of anything in particular that you would want to. I've never used a pickup. I've never put a pickup on a banjo. Somewhere I have a 6-string gold tone guitar that has a pickup on it, but I've never bothered with that. I wouldn't know what to say about that, Sarah. Get you a Recording King Dirty 30s for 200 US. That'll do you. I have a sister and a nephew in New Zealand. I've actually been to New Zealand 3 times. So I'm familiar with the North Island up there outside of Auckland, of course. So Banjo Man asked me if I've heard of the mountain dulcimer. Yes, I have, Banjo Man. I've had several dulcimers. They're easy to play. I can play them. George Gibson has a nice East Kentucky dulcimer collection. He studied dulcimers for a good long while. Look at this. This thing's running out of focus on me. Weird little camera. Okay, let's get to another question here. Oh, this is a good question. So Sonny asks, do we see a similar evolution of attitude toward banjos in England that would parallel that in the United States? Yes, we do. And it goes back to Joe Sweeney, and I want to say Billy Whitlock, maybe Dan Emmett was with them. These guys were the first blackface minstrels that really introduced the banjo to England. There was actually a plantation owner, I forget his name, in the 1700s, who was actually the first guy to bring the gourd banjo with the short thumb string to England. I forget his name, but he was a rich guy. He was a loyalist. And so when the American Revolution kicked off, he fled the U.S. I think he lived in Maryland. So he fled his plantation because he was a loyalist. He went back to England. He brought the banjo with him. Now the banjo itself doesn't survive, but he wrote about it. And there's family writings about him playing the banjo in England. This is in the 1700s. So there was one guy who introduced it, but it didn't take hold. What it took was Joe Sweeney and his gang, when they brought it over in the 1830s or early 1840s, I forget the details. It became pretty popular in England. And those guys, oddly, they didn't make that much money. I always grew up thinking that they got rich over there because there's stories of Joel Sweeney playing for the Queen of England. And there's stories about when he came home, he used to light his cigars with $100 bills. But apparently that's all bullshit. Joe Sweeney and them boys, they didn't really make a lot of money over there in England. They were sick half the time. But the banjo became very popular in England. And it started this kind of weird parallel pop culture over in England where you had guys who wanted to paint themselves up black and play the banjo or whatever. People also had no interest in painting themselves up black, and people wanted to play folk songs on the banjo or art music like pop music on the banjo. And oddly enough, the 5-string banjo did not take hold in England until much later. Everybody was trying to make it like a guitar because the guitar was popular. So they made 6-string banjos. They made a lot of 7-string and even 8-string banjos in England that were wildly popular through the 1860s, 1870s. But by about the 1850s, when the banjo starts getting real standardized in the United States, and you have the transatlantic cable, you have steamships going back and forth. There was a lot more contact between places like New York City and London, for example. And so they started importing the 5-string banjos. The Dobson brothers were instrumental in importing, sort of flooding the English market with cheap factory-made 5-string banjos. I want to say beginning in the 1880s. So it is parallel. I mean, even to this day, you can find banjos in England. They're still played, 5-string banjos. And that's something I'm not an expert by any means on that history, but I have read a few books that touch on the subject. So Fro's Moment says that they learned songs from their grandparents that were everything from stuff about banshees to working and planting tobacco. That's interesting that you mentioned the banshee. Banshee, if you guys, people who aren't familiar, as far as I know, it's an Irish monster. It's like a extraterrestrial, like demon from Ireland, and it's my grandmother, who was very Irish. As Irish as you could be for somebody born in Indiana. Her great grandparents were Irish immigrants, but she was an Irish Catholic, and she was very much identified as Irish. She was born in 1922 in Indiana, and she, whenever the wind was howling, and this was in Tampa, Florida, where she lived as an old woman. After World War II, she moved to Tampa, Florida. Whenever there was a hurricane coming and the wind was howling outside, my grandmother would tell me, "Oh, the banshees are outside." So consequently, I grew up fucking terrified of howling wind, because it always, every time I hear the wind howl to this day, I think, oh, there's banshees. The banshees are outside walking the moors, walking outside and just screaming. And supposedly banshees will steal children, they eat children and stuff. Pretty scary stuff. I'd like to know, Fro's Moments, if you remember any titles, if you can give us a hint on what some of those banshee or tobacco songs were like. So Frank Miska says, do you think there's any good folk music still intact in remote places of the Southeast? It's real spotty. It's real hit or miss. A lot of the Southeast has been, wiped out by world wars, the Civil War, the world wars. They wiped out a lot of the folk culture. But if you go to places like Louisiana, Lafayette, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, there's a ton of real folk music, as far as I know, still being played. It's all Cajun, French kind of stuff, but yeah, they're still doing it. In Texas, they still have sort of, as far as I know, there's like a actual traditional like polka scene where they do polka dances and stuff. That's all folk music. But if you want to talk about someplace like South Carolina, I spent a lot of time growing up in South Carolina. There's very little folk culture still intact in places like South Carolina, or even in Georgia, really. I mean, Georgia, you have some folk festivals and some banjo players and fiddle players and stuff, but I hate to say it, most of it's just festival folk revival bullshit that they've learned from instruction manuals that were printed in DC or New York. I mean, there's not a lot of authentic folk music still left in places like Georgia, or you'd have to get up into the mountains really to find where a little bit of it is still hung on. And it's really, really, even in the mountains of North Carolina and Virginia, there's not a whole lot. You've got some people around southwestern Virginia and some people in West Virginia and northwest North Carolina, East Kentucky. There's some people that are still doing it. East Tennessee, there's still a fair amount going on, but it's also very hard to find. It's mostly played in the home behind closed doors. These people don't come out to the festivals. I mean, the festivals are, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I have. The festivals are very hostile to actual folk culture and to actual Southerners and stuff. They don't really want us around at the big festivals. So if you go to some place like Cliff Top or Merlefest or Mount Airy, and you actually are playing real folk music, real traditional music, you're going to be out of place, because at those festivals, they don't play traditional music. Not really. They play festival music. And most of those festivals really can trace their roots back to New York City, 1960s. It's not a real folk tradition. So, I mean, I could go on and on, harp on about this for a long time, but you won't find a whole lot of actual folk culture left It's mostly been co-opted and commercialized by the festivals and the recording industry, and that's been going on since the early 1900s. There's not a whole lot. I mean, that gets back to why I started doing this YouTube channel. That's why I set up the Patreon. I never intended to earn any money doing it in the beginning. I really just wanted to try to preserve and spread what little glimpses of what I consider authentic folk culture that I have encountered and tried to save. That's really why I'm here talking to y'all right now, really, because there's not much. You have to you have to go to some asshole's live stream to try to find some of it. So Blaine says, I know you have an 1888 Luscombe, but do you have a favorite type of banjo to play, like spun overs, mountain banjos, minstrel banjos, certain tone rings, etc.? I really don't, Blaine. I couldn't say I have a favorite type of banjo. I really like my Luscombe, but it's by far not, it's not my favorite. By no means is it my favorite type of banjo. Like, I think the best banjo ever made was a 1888 Luscombe. I mean, they're not the best banjos ever made. Just, I have a good one and I play it. I really like the Bacon banjos. That a lot of time they have that internal resonator. Any of the Bacon banjos from the early 1900s, late 1800s, those are really good. They just sound great. I have played more than one original Bouchers. I played an original Boucher from the 1850s and an original Boucher from the 1840s. And those are both fantastic instruments. A lot of the banjos from the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, they're not very good. There was a New York maker named Jacobs who made banjos in the 1860s, I believe. And I've played an original 1860s Jacobs. And it just wasn't, there's a video of me playing it. It wasn't a very good banjo. It's very hard to play. Didn't sound like much. But if you get a hold of a Boucher, especially an 1850s Boucher that's in good shape, they sound great. The one I played sounded amazing, and it was easy to play. So I really like that. I really like fretless banjos. I have no favorite type. I'd say for the late 1800s, I like the Bacons. They're probably the best. For the earlier 1800s, I would go with the Ashbourne, or with the Boucher. I have played an original Ashbourne, but it was a real beat up, and it didn't sound like much. I'm sure when it was new, it was probably superior to the Boucher, but I just don't know for sure. And then getting up into the 1940s, 1950s, man, those Gretsch broadcasters are really good. Anything that Gibson or Gretsch made in the 1940s, those are great. Those are good. Those resonator. I like resonator banjos. Oh, let's see. So Richard says, how do you think the loss of this cultural element to music affects the experience of playing and singing? Oh, man. Well, let me put another log on the fire. It affects it drastically. Let me think about that for a second. That ought to catch. I mean, the lack of come on now. The lack of the culture of actual authentic folk culture in folk music, I mean, that's going to very drastically affect the experience, right? Because I just don't even know, Richard, I don't even know where to go with that, man. We were just talking about, I mean, just go to a festival, go to any of these festivals, or go to I mean, I know Corona's going on right now and stuff, but like, go to a damn jam at a bar in downtown Knoxville, and you'll just feel that there's no real connection, there's no real spark going on there, you know. So I don't want to get on a big long negative tangent about it, but it negatively affects it big time, you know. I'm sorry, this screen is blurry right now, y'all. I don't know why it's got this autofocus going on. Anyhow, I'll get too negative if I go on and on about that. I know y'all don't want to hear that. So Brown's Racing 29 says, Clifton, I have a fairly old banjo, but I'm unable to identify it. Do you have an email address I could send you pictures of? Yes, my email address, anybody here is welcome to email me. I don't have my keyboard hooked up right now, so otherwise I would type it in. My email address is cliffhicks@gmail.com. There's one F in my name. So my email address is cliffhicks@gmail.com. And you're all, somebody who knows it is welcome to type it in the chat for people. I don't care if you type my email address. Go ahead and email. I want you to email me pictures. That'd be great. This thing is supposed to be auto focusing, but she don't want to. Oh, well, nobody cares what I look like. So Mad Dog 1968 says, is there a Foxfire book that tells you how to make a fiddle? I don't know. I've never looked. I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is, but I wouldn't know. Somebody knows. I just wouldn't know. Rise Up 144 says, do you know Cedric Watson? He's from my neck of the woods. I've never met Cedric. I know who he is. I mean, he lives out there in Louisiana, right? I've never met him. Never met Cedric Watson. So Simon Smith says, I'm from Northern Wales. How do you pronounce that, Simon? Ryle, North Wales. You said one time that you'd been to Holyhead. Were you touring playing the banjo? No, I did not have a banjo with me at the time, and I'll forever kick myself for not carrying a banjo with me. I was in the Army, and we had just got back from Iraq. It was 2004, and they let us loose on Christmas break. And it's kind of a little sad. Me and my one buddy, we didn't want to go home for Christmas. We were kind of, scarred, and I was hanging out with a bunch of guys who were abusing drugs and selling drugs and stuff. And I wanted to get away from those guys. And so me and this other kid, he was just an alcoholic, which in the Army is totally acceptable. So me and him said, fuck, we're not going home for Christmas. We want to go to and just tour Europe. And he was getting out of the Army soon, and I figured I would too. So we had, each of us had like 20,000 euros in our pockets, and we just started hopping around Europe. We went to Brussels, we went to Paris, we went to Berlin, of course. We went to London, we went to Dublin, and at one point we wound up having a layover in Holyhead at a ferry station in Wales. That was kind of a funny story because there was a huge storm. They called it a gale on that channel between England and Ireland, between Wales and Ireland, and we got stuck in Holyhead for like, I don't know, it was like a 19-hour layover or something. And it wasn't just a storm, but also the ferry workers were on strike in the middle of a storm. So we were stuck in the ferry station at Holyhead in the middle of a gale is basically like a hurricane or a tropical storm. It was terrible. And I want to say it was a 19-hour layover, and we were actually stuck in there with, I don't know what else to call these guys, but they were like, pretty sure they were what you'd call soccer hooligans. They were all drunk off their asses, and I guess they were Irish because they were waiting to get on the ferry from Wales to go back to Dublin. So I guess they were Irish football hooligans. They were drunk as shit. And this one guy had his wife and his kid with it. They were all drinking beers, and they were hammered drunk, and they were drinking beers in the ferry station. And I swear to God, this one guy, he got mad at his kid, and he threw an empty beer can at his kid. And he decked the kid in the head with just an empty beer can, but it was like really disturbing to me and my buddy. And my buddy was like not having it, and he like sort of started to stand up and was like, "What the fuck, dude? Like you just threw a beer can at your kid, you know?" And I kind of was like, "Whoa, dude! Like these guys will kick our ass. Like they'll put us in the hospital. Like you don't want to mess with these guys." And these drunk guys were kind of like, "What the fuck?" Like they kind of got up, but they didn't even want to like, you know, they didn't even want to beat our ass or nothing. They ignored us after that, but they almost beat the shit out of us. They would have gladly, because they were in a terrible mood, like their team must have lost or something. They wanted to fight, and hell, they would have killed us probably. And my buddy didn't give a damn. But that's my story about Wales. I don't know anything about Wales except the inside of the ferry station in Holyhead. So Sean Murphy is a big fan in Ireland, he says, and he plays Irish tenor banjo. And he's asked me, "Have you ever played much tenor banjo?" I have not, Sean. I have never played a tenor banjo. I have one that I need to sell, and part of why I don't sell it is because I just dread stringing it up and trying to play it. I have no idea what to do with a 4-string tenor banjo. So Chris Kamen says, "True tradition is hard to find. Perhaps the misassociation to racial non-PC tunes explains this. Yet this is America at its core." Yeah, that's true. And one thing I want to point out, Chris, a lot of these songs that people call racist because they have the N word in them and all this, that, and the other, a lot of those songs were composed by black people. And they're part of black folk culture, and they've been sung by black people for generations. So it's actually really ignorant and insensitive when we refer to these songs as racist, because they're not. They come from black folk culture. It doesn't matter how many N-bombs they drop in the song. It's a black song. It comes from their culture. They're singing about themselves. It really pisses me off when some asshole with a degree or whatever from some fancy university up north, I don't give a damn what color he or she is or says they are, but when they just refer to these songs as racist because they got an N-bomb in the lyrics, that's fucking stupid. That's really ignorant. And when you just take note, when you see somebody saying that, "Oh, Cotton Eye Joe is a racist song," or "Run Jimmy Run" is a racist song, just know anytime you see somebody saying that, that person's ignorant. They are putting on display their complete lack of cultural and historic literacy. I mean, they are illiterate. When it comes to our culture and our history, these people might as well not be able to read and write. When they say that those songs are racist, they're showing how ignorant they are, because they're not racist. These songs come from the black folk tradition. They're not racist. And it doesn't, just because I'm white, if I sing, I'm white, right? If I sing, "Run Jimmy Run" or "Cotton Eye Joe" or "You Shall Be Free, You Shall Be Free," if I sing that song, it doesn't mean I'm racist. I'm not. I'm singing a folk song. Maybe the lyrics are offensive, but I don't really give a fuck. Anyhow. So DUP, D-U-P, is asking me, oh, wait, no. Well, we skipped ahead here. Oh boy, here's so everybody loves Devin. Gave us $5. Thank you, Devin. And he says, "What's your opinion of Brad Leftwhich? Would his books on the round peak style be considered authentic?" I've never met Brad Leftwhich. I've never listened to any of his playing, or not very much of it. I have seen one of his tablature books before. I think somebody gave it to me early on, and honestly, I didn't have any use for it. What my interpretation of Leftwich's work in that one book I looked at was, it looked like he was trying to do to transcribe note for note in tablature the music of somebody like Kyle Creed or Fred Cockram or something. When you're trying to transcribe the music of somebody who's never even looked at a page of tablature in their life, who's just a master banjoist, when you try to transcribe them into tablature, it's virtually impossible to do it note for note. The music's never going to come out right. So is it authentic? I don't know. To me, it looked like it was just a bunch of chicken scratch on a page. It's far too complex. Kyle Creed wouldn't be able to play out of that book, right? So, well, first of all, we know that tablature is not authentic. So the very act of transcribing tablature is something that Roscoe Holcomb never even thought of doing. Fred Cockram never even thought of doing. Kyle Creed never looked at a sheet of tablature in his life. Virgil Anderson, Cousin Emmy, Elizabeth Cotton, Dink Roberts, none of these people ever purchased or even looked at a sheet of tablature in their life. So my short answer to that, everybody loves Devon, is that no, it's not authentic. If it's a tablature book, if it's a book of tablature, it's not authentic. I offer tabs on the Patreon site for our Patreon members because they've demanded that I do that. So I offer them, but I would always much prefer my students learn visually by ear and by eye, because that's the way our ancestors learned the music. I can't recommend any tablature because just the very concept of tablature itself is it's anachronistic. It's contrary to the tradition. If you can only learn through tablature, by all means use it. But if you can find any way to break yourself away from tablature, you have to. You have to get away from it, because honestly, you can't even imagine the world that you're missing out on by focusing on tablature. You're missing a lot if you just focus on tablature. So my advice to people who are stuck with tablature right now is to try to wean yourself off of it. Try to learn a new song by ear and by eye. Try to force yourself to get away from that tablature. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to. I'm to the point now where I would never even consider, it doesn't even occur to me to look up a tab for something. I just don't. I don't like it. And since I was a kid, since I was 14, 15 years old, I've not used tablature. And you can do that too. It's totally possible. So Richard says, I've noticed a sense of rootlessness when playing with other players. For me, that's all I've ever known, so I don't know what I'm missing. Yeah. It's hard if you haven't been in contact with a real old timer, somebody like George Gibson or Lee Sexton, somebody who's just salt of the earth, who's got it in their veins. It's difficult to get like the essence of the music. But yeah, the essence of the music is not to be found in the jam circle. You're never going to find it at a banjo contest, at a festival, for example, or in a jam circle. You're just not going to find it there. Not very likely. You can find it at the festivals, but you've got to go and find somebody one-on-one who knows what they're doing. You're not going to find it in the jam circle. You're not going to find it at the contest lineup. Okay, so here's the question before. Dup says, hey, Clifton, have you ever heard of Carver banjos? He's on YouTube, and he sells banjo kits aimed at beginners that can be assembled with basic hand tools. I've heard of Carver banjos. I've never played one. I think generally people say that they're pretty good. I don't know. I couldn't tell you one way or the other. I'm sure they're easy to assemble because I've seen enough people assemble them with no fancy tools or anything. But I don't know what really to tell you about Carver. I've never met the guy. I've never played one of his instruments. So a forerunner says, could you simply explain how you shape the end of a banjo neck to snugly fit against a pot or the rim of the banjo? So there's a couple of ways you can do it. I mean, if you're making a mountain banjo, it's much simpler because the mountain banjo, you really just, especially if it's octagonal, you just have flat angles to work with. So it's much easier to fit flat to flat than it is to fit round to round. But traditionally, if you want to make like a normal banjo and have it fit snugly, you've got to cut, like let's say this is your fingerboard coming down and this is the rim of the banjo. You've got to cut a little semicircle that matches the rim of the banjo. So I'll tell you the way I do it, and it works for me, is I take the rim of the banjo. Once I have the neck all done, I know how it's going to be. I take the rim of the banjo and I lay it over the fingerboard and I trace that line. And I flip it over on the heel and I put the rim on there and I trace the line again. Then I'll put that banjo neck in a vise so that the semicircle I got to cut out is up. I'll put a little bubble level on it so it's perfectly level. I'll take a very sharp back saw. Some people call it a dovetail saw. I call it a back saw. Take a very sharp back saw or dovetail saw and cut out, make a series of slots, and that getting the profile of that semicircle that's going to match flush against the rim. And then I will chisel that out. Very important, you need a round chisel. If you go to do that with a flat chisel, it's going to mess up. You got to do it with a round chisel, and you chisel that out. And that's how I do it. There's videos that'll tell you how to, you can look it up. There's books. I learned from books and from videos on YouTube, but you can find YouTube videos. You can go in your public library and find traditional woodworking books that will tell you even better. That will tell you how to cleanly cut that semicircle out. And it's not that hard. It can be done. You need like an X-Acto knife, and you need a round chisel, and a couple different sizes of chisel is going to help you. And you need a very sharp back saw or dovetail saw. So Sean over in Ireland is asking again. He says, is the tenor banjo very popular in America? It's really not. I mean, over here, the king is 5-string banjo. But if you go into New York City or New Orleans or maybe even places like LA, you're going to find a lot more people playing tenor banjos because there's a lot more people that are playing ragtime and jazz and sort of big band stuff. And the tenor banjo is way more popular. I've had tenor banjos. I've tried to sell them off and on. I had a really hard time selling tenor banjos or 6-string banjos for that matter. But the 5-string banjos, I can't keep them in stock. I sell 5-string banjos all day long. The 5-string banjo is definitely king in America. But the tenor banjo, it is popular, but nowhere near like it is in Ireland. You know, everybody in Ireland plays a tenor banjo, as far as I know. In the States, you'd have to go to the urban centers. Like I said, you got to go to New Orleans, New York City, or LA, someplace like that, and you'll find tenor banjo pickers, and they can be quite common. Oh, here. So Alistair McLennan says, good day from Australia. Love your music. What's the story behind Southern Texas? Love that song. So Southern Texas is really just an East Kentucky version of a much more famous ballad called Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers comes from Texas, and Texas Rangers tells a story about a gunfight that took place in the 1830s between the Texas Rangers are a law enforcement agency that actually is still around in Texas. And the first time the Texas Rangers encountered a group of hostile Comanche warriors was in the 1830s, and they had a nasty gun battle. And Texas Rangers were armed with the brand new Colt revolving pistols. They had 5-shot revolvers. And they actually were able to fight off a numerically superior force of Comanche warriors. And it made the newspapers, and it was a very popular thing. And that ballad came out of the 1830s encounters between the Texas Rangers and the Comanches. So And it was so popular, and people were constantly, I mean, even going back into the 1800s, people were traveling west from the mountains, going to Texas and places like that. A lot of those people came back to Kentucky, and they brought the songs back with them. So that's how Southern Texas, I think, came to be popular in Kentucky. Like I said, Texas Rangers is very similar song, and it enjoyed a lot of popularity in East Kentucky too. Okay, I'm just looking for another question in here. So Thomas Becker asks, I play both down and up picking, but I have trouble keeping the rhythm when I switch mid-song. I think it's because I have to switch from tapping my foot from during downstrokes to upstrokes. Any tips? Man, Thomas, I don't know what to tell you with that. That's tricky. I've mostly played alone, so sometimes I drift in and out of different rhythms. I don't always keep perfect time. Maybe y'all have noticed in some of my videos. Um, I don't know what to tell you with that. It just takes practice. If you're going to, especially when it's doing, that's sort of a very advanced technique, is switching your playing styles mid-song. That's advanced to begin with, but you just gotta keep that rhythm, Thomas. I don't know what to tell you, man. You just gotta stick with it. The way you'll figure it out is just keep trying it, keep doing it. You'll figure it out. So Spaz God says, "Good evening from Sweden. I love all these people, these far-flung people that come in here. That just blows me away. It never ceases to amaze me." So from Sweden, Spaz God says, "Do you have any tips for someone who has plateaued in his banjo playing? I can't seem to improve, but I love playing." Buddy, yeah, I feel you on that. Banjo burnout is a real thing, and burning out and plateauing is about the same sort of problem. What he's talking about when he plateaus is, you're learning, and you get really good, and then you just stay at this level for years and maybe for years. You just plateau, and you don't get any better. So really, Spaz God, the way you're going to break out of that is learn a new playing style. If you're only playing overhand, clawhammer, down picking, teach yourself how to two-finger pick. If you're already two-finger picking and overhanding, teach yourself how to three-finger pick. If you're already doing all of that, teach yourself how to up pick. If you don't play any waltz time tunes, learn to play a waltz. Learn Bonnie Blue Eyes or something, or Old Joe's Barroom, or some kind of waltz tune. That's one way you can do it. Yeah, it's tricky. The way you have to force yourself off of a plateau. Playing with other people helps, but we're all stuck in this Corona nonsense, so we're not really playing with others right now. That will usually can often boost you out of a plateau. But really, you just got to learn a new style. Try to play listen to some Virgil Anderson. Try to play like that crazy fool. There's all kinds of things you can do to try to bust out of a plateau. This is something that I've been through numerous plateaus. I've been playing banjo for like 23 years. I probably plateaued dozens of times, and you have to break out of it. Okay, so Simon says, "I have a Remo fiber skin on my banjo. It's bubbled and blistering in the thumb strike area. Any recommendations for a replacement?" Yes, Simon, I would just go with the plain Remo frosted banjo head. That's what I recommend now, just the plain, cheap frosted head. I think you'll find the banjo sounds a lot better than it does with fiber skin. Fiber skin's got it's got this textured surface that I think interferes with the feet of the bridge. I don't like fiber skin heads for that reason. I always recommend just go with the plain frosted Remo head. So Janie asks about clawhammer. Is there Now, do you mean overhand versus clawhammer? Is there a right or wrong preference, Janie? I kind of don't understand your question, Janie, but long story short, when it comes to anything with traditional banjo, there really is no right or wrong way. And if you're talking about the terms overhand versus clawhammer, I get into that in like every live stream, but short story is that clawhammer as a way to describe traditional down picking on the banjo, clawhammer only started being used in 1965. That's the earliest reference you will find to clawhammer being used to describe down picking. Clawhammer was used before that to describe vernacular finger picking, but it was not used to describe what we think of as clawhammer today. It was not used until 1965. So terms that were used include overhand, rapping, like rapping on a door, or just picking the banjo. Drop thumb was used. All these, there was many terms that were used, but clawhammer was a term that was not historically used to describe down picking before the 1960s. So for that, in that case, I mean, clawhammer is technically, it's like wrong to use that term, but I realize that everybody uses that term and we're not getting away from it. So I'm not dying on that hill, you know. So Justin gave us another $5. Thank you, Justin. He says, what are your views on the effects of technology on folk music, not only in the music, but the musicians themselves? Well, Justin, I mean, there's lots of good effects, right? Like, for example, me and you or anybody in this chat right now, we can pull up, we can search the internet on YouTube or all these numerous databases. I've talked about the Digital Library of Georgia, the Digital Library of Appalachia, the Alan Lomax Kentucky Recordings website. There's lots of resources. So, I mean, that's all good. If you want to see the bad effects of technology on folk music, you know, just go to social media, just pull up Instagram or Facebook or any of these other hell sites, and you'll see all the negative effects of technology. Other negative effect is like, you know, digital tuners and tablature and stuff. If you ask me, in the long run, tablature and digital tuners kind of, I don't know, too many people use them as a crutch. I'm not going to get down on it, because if a digital tuner and tablature is what is enabling you to play this music at all, then far be it from me to criticize that. But I think most people don't need digital tuners. Most people don't need tablature. Most people don't need instructional videos, but they just use them as crutches. But whatever, boo-hoo. So Klaus Rockwell asks, Clifton, did you take a banjo with you in the Army? Yeah, I did. I didn't take one with me, but after we'd been in Iraq for about 10 months or so, we're getting regular mail. I ordered a banjo. I ordered a Deering Goodtime. And just to give you some idea of how long ago that was, that Deering Goodtime was about $300 even with shipping. So that tells you how long ago that was. And I played that Deering banjo all over Iraq and Germany. So Jessie Riddle has got a great question. She says, he or she says, do you know of any old-time banjo players from North Georgia? Yes. Jesse, there's a ton. There was a ton of them up here. I mean, you want to talk about contemporary ones, look up Christopher Turpin. He's a great one. Oh, hell, it's the other guy's name. I just met this other guy, but I forget his name. But Jesse, you need to get on the Digital Library of Georgia. Type that into your search engine, look up Digital Library of Georgia, and just type in the word banjo, and there you'll pull up all these great recordings and films, mostly done by Art Rosenbaum in the 80s. And so some of the great ones, you've got Lawrence Eller, you've got Ed Teague. There is a bunch of them. Most of them are two-finger players, actually, believe it or not. My favorite North Georgia banjo picker was an old lady from Carnesville, Georgia, who was an ex-con, a drug dealer, a former moonshiner, a hell of a woman. Her name is Mabel Cawthorn, C-A-W Thorn, Mabel Cawthorn. Look up Mabel Cawthorn. You can find her on YouTube and stuff. She's my favorite North Georgia banjo player, just not because she was like, technically amazing or anything. I think she was wonderful, but just as a person, her character and her life story and stuff was really, she's one of the coolest people that I've ever learned about. Look up Mabel Cawthorn. She was from Carnesville, Georgia, not too far from Athens. Whew. I'm going to get another beer, y'all. I'll be right back. Yippee! Mexico, good girls. Ugh. Good. Whew. Man, it's been a really warm winter. It's raining outside and it's not very cold. I switched. Boy, I'm so drunk I couldn't even barely. Oh, so Merrick, I'm gonna have a hell of a time pronouncing your last name, good sir. Merrick Korzenowski. Merrick Korzenowski. So Merrick asks, Clifton, do you like Tommy Jarrell's style? Yeah, Tommy Jarrell is the real deal, man. Tommy Jarrell is he's world famous as a fiddle player. I love his fiddle playing. A lot of people kind of rag on him and say he was kind of rough, but well, I like some of that rough music, But Tommy Jarrell was also a great banjo player. He was a round peak player, and he was damn good. Don't know what else. He's down picker, drop thumb, clawhammer player. So Connor Fannin is one of my younger students. Y'all should check him out. He's actually a really good banjo player and a damn good singer too. And Connor says, do you think some people just can't learn by ear, or do you think it just takes practice? I've had trouble with it for a while now. Connor, since I know you and I've seen you play and I've seen you learn songs, I know you can learn by ear. So no, it's not. I think almost anybody can learn by ear, and I know for a fact that you can. Connor's only 14 or 15 years old, so you just gotta. I was probably 14, going on 15 before I was yeah, and it was really still challenging for a long time. It took me years to get good at it. I'd still like to be better at it, Connor. You can definitely do it, dude. You're young. Like I said, you're 14 years old. You need to keep trying. We need to do another lesson, and you and I will discuss this one-on-one. That's how we're going to figure this out. But you can do it. When I met George, George is a great, nice old guy. He's a real gentleman, and he's really treated me. George, when I was a kid, George Gibson treated me better than my own grandfathers ever did. But he was harsh, and George was a very harsh critic, harsh teacher in a lot of ways. And he forced me to learn by ear. So that's what I need to do with you guys. But Connor, you can learn by ear. You just got to keep trying, buddy. Got to keep trying. You'll be able to. Oswald is asking me about, I think it's a book called The Marshall Family Banjo Player. I'm not familiar with that, Oswald. I'm sorry. I don't know. So Dupp says, Clifton, have you ever heard of Bella Fleck and Abigail Washburn's version of Bartok's Quasi-Adagio? What's your opinion of classical pieces on the banjo? I think it's all well and good. I think that's great. From a young age, my dad tried so hard to get me to like Bella Fleck. He took me to a Bella Fleck concert one time. I don't care about art music or classical music played on the banjo. I'm sorry. I know that that's stupid of me and ignorant and closed-minded of me, but try as I may, I just don't care about it. What I care about is the blue-collar, working-class, enslaved, real traditional stuff that nobody ever wrote down. That's what I really care about. To me, once I see something on a page and it's been composed and it's been totally documented and quantified, to me, it kind of, what does it mean? And especially, I mean, I'm guessing it's a classical piece. There's no lyrics to it. To me, the lyrics and the poetry of this old music is so important. To me, it's more important than the music. That's just my opinion. So when you're playing stuff that doesn't have words to it right off the bat, you've lost my interest. And then if it's not even like a fiddle tune or a dance tune or something that was actually played by working people who worked with their hands in America, or even in anywhere, if it wasn't played by working people, I don't know, call me snobby, but I can't bring myself to care about it. So I don't give a damn about any of that classical music on the banjo. Is it good music? Yes, clearly. I mean, Bela Fleck is an amazing musician. I mean, the guy's great. There's no denying that he's a great technical musician. But when it comes to like the spirit, the soul, the culture, it ain't there. It's somewhere else. So Blaine's asking me if I saw Nora Brown's recent show on NPR. I did. I did stumble across that and watched that. That kid's come a long way. I gave her a few lessons, not only online but also in person. We had some like study sessions, she and I, and starting when she was 11 years old. And man, she was already a great banjo player when she was 11, which is a tall order. I didn't start picking till I was 13. I probably wasn't any good till I was 15. And that kid, Nora Brown, she was already a pretty good banjo player at 11, and she could pick up stuff visually. So I was I was impressed with her, but I haven't had much contact with her in a few years. I still keep up with her dad. Sort of. He sends me emails and he sends me letters, and I've never responded to one of his letters. I should. I feel bad about that, but I've been kind of down on that whole New York scene for a couple years. Some people up there kind of disappointed me, and I got my heart broken by Jalopy Records and the Brooklyn Folk Festival. You've all heard me gripe about that. It's a sore subject. So I haven't been paying attention to anything that happens in New York, but I did see Nora's recent NPR performance. That's great. Besides the wonderful picking and singing that she did, I was really happy that she mentioned Lee Sexton and George Gibson by name. To me, that's very important. I hate it when a banjo player has clearly learned something from someone like George Gibson or Lee Sexton, for example, and they play it and the audience applauds and they go on to the next thing. I know you don't always have time to cite your sources, especially on stage, but you should always try to do that. If you've learned, especially, I mean, I don't care if you learn something from me, it's great. If you would credit me, I would appreciate that. But it really breaks my heart when somebody plays a song that they learned, especially from George, because I've met Lee Sexton, and I love Lee, and I had a great time hanging out with him one time. But George kind of raised me in a way. I have a deep bond with George Gibson. So when I see a younger banjo player who plays something that clearly came from George Gibson, and they don't say his name, that hurts me a little bit. So I was really happy that she mentioned George by name and she mentioned Lee Sexton by name. That's very important for you, especially you young banjo players out there. It's very important to name your sources. And if you learn something from me, don't just say I learned it from Clifton Hicks. Find out who I learned it from. Say I learned it from Clifton Hicks, who learned it from George Gibson. George Gibson learned it from his father about 1950, or George Gibson learned it from Grandpa Hudson or Shade Ambergy or any number of other people. Try to go back as many generations as you can and cite your sources going back. Maybe that's just me being an academic, I'm a stickler for citing sources, but I think it's very important. And I was very happy to see that Nora mentioned Lee and George by name. That's very important to me. That made me feel good. So Simon says, Cliff, what is your favorite whiskey? Bourbon, rye, Scotch, or what? If I was just going to go in a liquor store and buy whiskey, I used to drink a lot of Jim Beam rye. I wouldn't say that's my favorite. The best whiskey I ever drank was last time I was at George Gibson's house, believe it or not. George, Joe Hornung, and I, those both two old men from Kentucky, we stayed up till past 3 o'clock in the morning drinking very expensive Scotch whiskey. George is into Scotch, and George, he don't think he'll pay $100 or more for a fifth of Scotch whiskey. We sat up night, we drank half of 1/5 and probably 2/3 of another fifth. And we sat up till past 3 o'clock in the morning drinking really expensive Scotch whiskey with George Gibson and Joe Hornung and me. I was the only other guy there. And it was one of my fondest memories. I had a wonderful time. In a situation like that for a young man. A little bit of advice to you guys is just go ahead and keep your mouth shut and let those two old men loosen up and start telling stories, because those guys are Joe is in his 70s, I believe, and George is in his 80s now, and they have some stories, buddy. They have stories from going back from before I was ever even thought of. So I sat up with those two old gentlemen till about 3:30 in the morning, drinking expensive Scotch whiskey. I don't know what brands we drank. I just know it was all really good. We drank it straight with ice cubes. It was really good. And it was actually me who said, hey, it's 3:30 in the morning. We need to go to bed. I was the one, the 30-year-old that ended the party. So Merrick Korzanowski says, it seems like a lot of the modern string band music is influenced by Tommy Jarrell music, but you seem not to like it. I'm curious why. Well, Merrick, it's because, just go to Clifftop and listen to a jam. And then when you're done listening to them play Big-Eyed Rabbit or whatever the hell, Cumberland Gap or something, and then go back to your truck, put on your earphones and listen to Tommy Jarrell play Big-Eyed Rabbit, or listen to Tommy Jarrell or Fred Cockrum or Kyle Creed play Cumberland Gap. There's no comparison. What they're doing, my gripe is not that I don't like it. I mean, it's perfectly good music. There's lots of good musicians who go to the festivals and who compete in the competitions and who have record deals and all this other stuff. There's lots of good musicians, but it's all technical. There's no comparison between them and the original music that they claim to be recreating. They're not. I don't know. I just don't know how to put it into, they don't play like those guys. And the reason they don't is because Tommy Jarrell didn't learn from tablature. Tommy Jarrell learned from his eyes and his ears, and just growing up in the tradition and just immersing himself in the music. All these people who try to mimic Tommy Jarrell, and mostly what most of the music you're hearing at the festivals, Merrick, they're really mimicking Kyle Creed, the banjo players, anyhow. And it's just, anytime you try to mimic somebody who's a master like that, you're going to fall short. It's just like, listen to all these bluegrass banjo players who claim to play Scruggs style banjo. I can listen to any number of them, and just by listening to them without looking, I know that none of them are Earl Scruggs because they don't sound anything like him. It just falls flat. I don't like it. I think it's a waste of time, and it ignores the tradition. Tommy Jarrell never tried to sound like anybody else. Tommy Jarrell never, like I said, he never opened a book of tablature. Kyle Creed never tried to sound like anybody else. You'd be scorned if you tried to sound like anybody else. The music is about coming up with your own unique approach. It's not about mimicking other people. That's nonsense. It's anachronistic. It's anathema. It's not traditional. I'm not saying the music is bad. I'm just saying that it's not traditional, and it's not what I'm interested in. It just goes against everything that I was ever taught about the music. Like when I learned from people like George Gibson and Ernie Williams, they never, especially George, viciously drove it home that you're not to ever try to copy somebody else. This is your music. You play it your way. You don't try to copy me or anybody else. So, I mean, that's my gripe. One of my many gripes with the festival scene. The other gripe is that most of them are a bunch of assholes. But we don't need to get into that. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. But I love Tommy Jarrell's music. What I don't like is all these people trying to copy him and falling flat. So Mr. Swack says he's going to put a goat skin head on his banjo this next weekend. Any tips? It depends. You're going to have a hard time. It's not easy. So I just don't know. Are you just going from are you actually going from just a rawhide goat skin that's not mounted? It can be pretty challenging. You'll just have to do trial and error. I don't really know what to tell you. If you order it from like elderly.com, it'll come with a sheet of instructions. My best advice that I can give you in one little soundbite is when you go to put that new head on your banjo, you're going to soak it in water first, and then you're going to mount it and stuff. Don't do it on a rainy day, and don't do it on a real dry, hot day. Do it on a normal, average humidity day. That will help you a lot, letting the banjo settle in. The other thing you need to do is it'll really help you if you order a set of mounting hooks. So these are tension hooks that are extra long, because the actual tension hooks that are on your banjo are, a lot of times they're not long enough to mount the banjo. You need longer hooks. So Patrick Sawyer, who runs Balsam Banjo Works, BALSAM, go to Balsam Banjo Works and you can order a set of extra long hooks. You only need maybe 6 or 8 of them to get the head started. But you need a set of extra long mounting hooks to get started. That will make it so much easier. If you try to use the little short hooks that are on your banjo already, you're going to have a much more difficult time. It's still possible, but you're going to have a much more difficult time. And if you have antique hooks, that's when they will break. And so if you have an antique banjo, it's very important to have a set of extra long hooks, modern hooks, that are not your antique hooks when you're mounting the head. So mount the head with the long modern hooks because they won't break. And if they do, who cares? But if you try to mount them with your antique hooks, there's a good chance those old antique hooks will break. That's the best advice I can give you, Pilgrim. Good luck. Josh Sullivan gave us $10. Hey, Josh. Josh is another one of my really good students. He's a great finger picker. Family's from Texas. Just said he had to leave. Okay, Josh, we'll see you later, buddy. Mark gave us $2. He said, "Workers of the world unite." I can get behind that. I'm waiting on that day, Mark. It ain't happened yet. Blaine is asking me to play Lonesome Road Blues. Blaine, buddy, I would play it, but the audio will sound like shit. And so I've decided I'm not going to play any banjo on these live streams until I get that audio problem sorted out. If somebody can help me figure out how to get my audio to sound good on here, please do. The audio sounds fine when I'm speaking or if I'm singing, but the moment I start picking the banjo, the audio goes to shit. It sounds underwater. And I don't know. I've tried a lot of different things. I can't figure it out. So if somebody can help me figure that out, buddy, I would pick the banjo. I would much rather pick the banjo than just sit here and jaw with y'all, but banjo sounds like shit on this stream. Oh, Skinhead asked me whatever happened to my Instagram page. I deleted Instagram over a year ago, man. Instagram doesn't pay any money, and it really wasn't worth it to me to spend time on there. it really wasn't worth it to me to spend time on there posting all these pictures of my dogs and my house and my banjos and stuff. And there's no way to make any money on Instagram. So I decided to narrow it down to YouTube, Patreon, and I'm still grudgingly using Facebook just because I have kind of a bigger following on Facebook than I had anywhere else. And Facebook actually does translate into money because you can post videos on Facebook and get attention and drive traffic to the YouTube page. But this is all business bullshit. I mean, I really hate Facebook. I hate Instagram. I hate fucking Google. All these assholes, these billionaire assholes that control all this. I fucking hate them. And so I highly recommend kind of curtailing your social media use. It's really not good for us. Go outside. I would rather watch paint dry or have a conversation with a dog. So Aaron Abling asks, is that a PBR? Yeah, that's a blue ribbon. I was drinking Yinglings before this. Ninky's talking about putting the sound baffles up. I guess you mean like the background, like the foam stuff. It's not really that. It's not my microphone, Ninky, because I will record audio with this mic. This is a decent microphone. And it sounds good if I just record audio tracks. And it sounds good for speaking and stuff. But no matter what setting I use on this or the software, when I start playing the banjo, it cuts the banjo out. I don't know why. And I have live streamed on other platforms and it doesn't do that. So I think it's YouTube. And I think it's just because we don't even have 20,000 subscribers. So maybe if we get like 100,000 subscribers, YouTube will stop throttling me and give me better audio. I don't know. But I'm open to all suggestions. Thank you, Aaron, for the $5. Thank you, Harry, for the $5. Boy, I love it. I love getting them super chats. Oh, Nikki, you're from Pennsylvania? Yingling, isn't Yingling from Pennsylvania? Hell yeah. A lot of good beer in Pennsylvania. Grolsch. I used to drink a lot of Grolsch when I was working up in Pennsylvania. So Skinhat says, do you ever listen to Cajun fiddling? If so, who are some of your favorites? Oh yeah, the Balfa brothers are great. Who's that black dude? Conray Fontenot. Oh man, I love Conray Fontenot. That dude's awesome. Balfa brothers. I like any of that. I love Cajun music. I love Mexican music as well. I love anything that's in Spanish or French that's not European, that's American. Oh, I love the Cajun. I love the Canadian stuff. And I love the Mexican music. I mean, I listen to that stuff all the time. I'm actually thinking about doing a Spanish language album. It's difficult. I'm trying to find somebody who'll translate for me because I really want to do I want to do an album in Mexican Spanish. I think that would be pretty cool. So if anybody knows anybody who'd be willing to translate some songs for me, I'm looking. Hey, Willow, thanks for the $5. Skinhat, where are you from? You said half your city speaks French. Are you up in Montreal by any chance? So Sam Holden says, do you like Ulster Scots traditional music, and would you ever do a version of an Ulster Scots tune? Yeah, sure, Sam, I would. I'm not familiar with a lot of that music. Most of the Irish music I know about is like Luke Kelly, Tommy Makem, guys like that. So I don't really know like Ulster, Northern Ireland music. I know some border songs. Like I need to do that one. It's called Bonnie George Campbell. Look up Bonnie George Campbell. That's a Scots-Irish song, but it's probably from Lowland Scotland, and it is about violence and warfare. Bonnie George Campbell. Oh, high upon Highland, low upon Tay, Bonnie George Campbell rode out on one day, all saddled, all bridled, all booted rode he. Home came the saddle, but never came he. So it's all about this guy who goes off to fight, and his horse comes home covered in blood, but George Campbell never comes home. He dies out there on the battlefield. Bonnie George Campbell is a great song that I play. Damn, I've got to do that song. Let me put a log on the fire, y'all. I'll be right back. Damn. Son of a bitch. I put this big monster of a log on the fire and it died down on me. Y'all got me distracted. William gave us $10. He said, keep it up. Thanks, William. I will. Thomas, I don't know. What do you think is the difference? Thomas asked, what do you think is the difference between 1920s folk music and 1920s hillbilly or old time music? I don't know. All those terms, Thomas, are very, what the kids now say, problematic. So when you say folk music, it's like, what do you mean? And when you say, I mean, hillbilly and old time, we know those are record labels that the radio and record labels put out to describe, sort of Southern vernacular music. I really don't know. I don't care for a lot of that 1920s radio and those early records and stuff. A lot of it just sounds too commercial to me, I don't much care for it. So Rodney Vest asked me, what is the origin of Death and the Lady? So nobody really knows. Death and the Lady, which if you guys are familiar, I've been, Old Leatherstocking, this character I've been doing who is the skeleton who plays the songs and stuff. I got the idea to do that. I wanted to play Oh Death for Halloween. I figured it's COVID right now. Everybody's freaked out about dying and stuff. So let's do this song. So I did Oh Death, and one of our students over on the Patreon group, I'm sorry I forget your name, but this guy sent me a link to a recording of Death and the Lady, which was by Norma Watterson. And Norma Watterson is this great folk singer over in England, and she did a version of Death and the Lady, and Death and the Lady is really just an older version of Oh Death. And Death and the Lady, I don't know, is probably documented to the 1800s or something, but you can find versions of that song, Oh Death, Death and the Lady, going back. The earliest one that anybody ever sent me was from the 1600s, a printed sheet music or printed lyrics from the 1600s. And it's called A Conversation Between Death and a Sinner. And if you'll remember, when Lloyd Chandler recorded that song in the 20s, I believe, Oh Death, he called it A Conversation with Death. So that shows continuity from 1920s America all the way back to 1600s England. They were singing that same song. Norma Watterson, she says that she thinks it goes back to the Black Death, the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, and that was ravaging England beginning in the 1300s, I think the middle 1300s. So maybe she's right about that. I don't know, but I would say it's safe to say that Oh Death goes back. Oh Death and Death and the Lady and Conversation with Death. Those songs are all part of the same family of songs, and they probably go back to the medieval era in Europe. Brian Lee Bauer says, I've had a band member and a student both mention your name in 1 week, so that's why I'm here. Love your stuff. Thanks, Brian. I do appreciate that. That's good to hear. I'm not a complete pariah. So Eli Acevedo says, Cliff, I've made a banjo, but my neck came out a bit thinner than I was hoping for. It's about 3/4 of an inch at the 5th fret. Do you think this will compromise the neck's strength? So Eli, that depends on a lot of things, like the material. What kind of hardwood did you make your neck out of? It depends on a lot of things. 3/4 of an inch at the fifth, that's not the end of the world. There are some thin banjo necks out there. So Eli, really in short, if you used a good piece of maple or walnut, presumably for your banjo neck, 3/4 of an inch at the fifth fret, you'll probably be all right. Just in the future, what you need to do is just take a banjo that you like and copy the dimensions from that banjo and just don't go any thinner. And when you make your first cuts, remember, you want to cut everything out when you rough it out, when you rough cut your neck out. You want everything to be a little bit bigger than what your final. And that's one of the hardest things of doing woodworking, is knowing how big to rough it out and then how small to finish it down to. It's tricky stuff. So Oswald Spengler is asking me, he says, what do you think of the clawhammer playing on the old Fairpoint Convention material with Watterson and Martin Carthy? Oswald, I've never heard that before. I'm not familiar with that. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to type that in and search it and pull it up. I've never heard that. I don't know. I wouldn't know what to say. I mean, my first impression, if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably not very good. But I'm real picky. I'll listen to like old time bands, and most of them have really weak banjo players. Most bands in general that have a banjo player, like if you listen to like modern country music, and there's a banjo in the song, usually it's pretty weak. So I don't know. I don't want to bring. I have to listen to it to know for sure. I'm not familiar with that. Blaine says, what elevation do you live at? Blaine, the elevation here is a little bit over 1,800 feet, right where the house sits. It's about 1,850, maybe 1,900 feet elevation, but no more than 1,900 feet. Misty says, y'all ought to check out some of Clifton's merch. I'm wearing a t-shirt right now. Yeah, y'all should. There's in the description to the video, there is a link. I have a Teespring store where you can order t-shirts. I'm a little embarrassed about it, but the latest design my wife Robin did, it's this nice drawing of me holding the banjo, and she did a really good job of putting the mountains in behind me. So if y'all want it doesn't say Clifton Hicks anywhere on it. It's a drawing of me, but it could be anybody else, and it has the words Banjo Heritage underneath it. I think it's a really nice design, hand drawn by Robin, who is a trained artist, and you can get that. There's a link in the description if anybody wants to order a T-shirt. I think they're pretty cool. The Ohio Fisherman says, do you like Old Crow Medicine Show? I have stories about Old Crow. I've met those guys one time before, and it would be, I don't like to do the names and stuff here, so I won't. The only banjo player that's in the band right now, I think, is old boy's name is Kevin. I think he plays a 6-string banjo, so he's really a guitar player. So the band doesn't really have a banjo player in it. They never really did. Because you have Willie Watson, he plays the banjo now, but Willie was really just starting to learn the banjo right about the time he left the band. I don't want to get too much into it, but do I like Old Crow Medicine Show? No, I don't like that. When I was a kid, when I was like 20 years old, I first got out of the Army, and I heard Wagon Wheel for the first time. I was at a party, and I was in Gainesville, Florida, with a bunch of train hopper kids. They were actually they were heroin users, and they had just got off a train, and they were partying in Gainesville. And my buddy was trying to get with this girl who knew them. So we would hang out and party with these train hopper kids, and those train hoppers always had a banjo, no matter who they were. I never brought we used to go party with them every weekend if we could. I thought they were pretty cool, and I never had to bring my own banjo because there was always some random banjo there at the party. So eventually I'd wait and I would pick the banjo up and I would take over the banjo playing. And that was the first time I ever heard Wagon Wheel. It came on the radio late one night, and all these drunk train hopper girls were like dancing to it out in the street. And I thought it was a great song. It really is a good song. It's just been beat to death. But aside from that, I don't really give a shit about Old Crow. They're not really, you know, I can't say anything too bad about them, and I can't say anything too good about them either. I don't really give a damn about them. You notice that they ran Willie out. Willie Watson was probably the only real authentic musician in the band, and they fucking ran him out. So that tells you everything you need to know about Old Crow. Oh, Oswald is saying, yeah, he meant to say Steel Eye Span and the track Boys of Bedlam with the clawhammer. Oswald, oddly enough, I grew up listening to that track, that Boys of Bedlam, but I never even noticed that there was a banjo on that track. I have to listen to it again, man. I don't remember. So Dup asks, have you ever heard of C.W. Stone King? He's a blues musician from Australia that captures the essence of a lot of old blues songs, I think. Seems genuine enough as well. I have heard of C.W. Stone King. I've never met the guy, but he seems like he's yeah. I like his stuff. I never met the guy. I don't know anybody who ever has met him, but he's a good musician, good singer. And what I like about him is what little I've listened to him is that you can kind of tell he don't give a damn. He kind of comes off like he don't give a damn what people think about him, which I think is a really good quality, especially in this day and age. People care too much what people think about him, and it really doesn't matter. Fuck all the haters, right? Oh, Chris Kamen is asking me about Merle Travis guitar picking. Buddy, I just don't even know. I've listened to a lot of Merle Travis, but I've never tried to pick guitar like him. So I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you about Merle Travis. Train hoppers equal crust punks. Yeah, that's another name for them. They don't like it when you call them. They don't like it when you call them train hoppers or crust punks. They like to be called travelers, or they like to be called tramps. I've heard tramps, and I've heard them call themselves travelers. Oh, cool. Rusty Shackelford says he bought one of our stickers. Cool. Thanks, man. Every little bit helps. And the stickers are the same design. Robin, my wife, she hand drew that sticker design. It's a real, I've got them laying around here somewhere. It's a real nice, where the hell I put them? It's just a real plain. We kind of were going for a retro, like festival T-shirt look, and I think she nailed it. So they're pretty cool. Check out, if you're interested in stickers or T-shirts, check out the link down below the video. It says T-shirts on the link. Okay, so Liam has a question. He says, I've been having trouble getting my fifth string to tune up. I can get up to an F, and then my peg feels really tight, like the string's about to snap. Liam, there's a lot of variables there, buddy. If you tell me more about what type of banjo you have, what type of fifth peg you have, if you have a cheap banjo, it's probably just that your fifth peg is starting to bind up on you. But if there's a screw anywhere on that fifth peg, take a screwdriver and loosen it a little bit. Maybe it's too tight. Because you can adjust the tension on most fifth peg, on most banjo tuners, you can adjust the tension with a screwdriver. So usually you have a problem with them getting too loose, but it sounds like yours may be too tight. If you have too many problems, you might just need to get a new fifth peg tuner, buddy. Evan Collins says, just say no to false round puke. I like Evan, buddy. I like that. Round puke. That's great. I'm going to steal that from you because I hate calling it round peak because it's an insult to people who are actually from Round Peak. What they're playing is round puke. My favorite term for round puke banjo playing is typewriter banjo because it sounds like they're playing a fucking typewriter. So Starry Pony Farms asked me if I've ever done any labor union songs for the channel, and do I plan to? I guess I never really have. The closest thing I've done to that is some Woody Guthrie covers. All You Fascists Bound to Lose. I've done, I've extensively recorded Gospel Plow or Hold On, that was made popular during the civil rights movement. But I'm kind of not that interested in some of that union, that pro-labor union stuff, just because it seems like, it comes out of the 30s and the 40s, and I'm kind of like, where I live, in the United States, we really don't have any labor unions anymore. They've basically been wiped out. Sure, there's still some, but I don't, labor unions in the United States are completely devastated. We don't really have a strong blue collar culture in this country anymore. It's sad. Whew, guys, I have to take a leak. I'll be right back. If you bear with me, I got to piss. If you got to leave, I understand. I'll be right back. Okay. And this must be the warmest winter on record, y'all. I just went outside to take a leak, and it's not cold at all. Usually it's unbearable here. Laird Kilbar Chan says U.S. blue-collar culture now lives in China. You are a cruel son of a bitch, but you're telling the truth. Let me see if I missed any questions here. So Take Dead Aim says, can you suggest a tailpiece for a Fairbanks Curtis Electric with nylon strings? I don't know what tailpiece would have originally come on that banjo, Take Dead Aim, but you can't go wrong on that period with a Kirshner tailpiece. Get on StewMac, that music website. Get yourself a Kirshner tailpiece. They make some pretty good ones. That's my favorite kind of tailpiece. You can get a really good one for about $70. And that's a good adjustable tailpiece. On a Curtis Electric, you really want an adjustable tailpiece because it'll make it sound a lot better. It's not the best, it's not the best tone ring. That Curtis Electric is kind of it's a cheap knockoff of just a regular Fairbanks Electric. It's kind of a cheesy tone ring. But if you get a Kirshner tailpiece and you ratchet it down behind the bridge, it'll sound a lot better for you. So I highly recommend getting something like a Kirshner. Get an adjustable tailpiece if you can. What would have actually been on that banjo? I don't know. Probably just some cheap plastic tailpiece what they shipped it with. Liam says, thank you for the Patreon. It's really helped me with my left hand movements. Okay, thank you, Liam. I'm glad to hear that, man. I just wanted to, shout out to the Patreon group. I love it. And just to get a little sentimental real quick, That Patreon project, when I first started it, y'all, I thought maybe I'd get 100 people. Right now, we have well over 1,000 regular members. And it blows me away every time I see that number. And just y'all paying $2 a month a piece has completely changed our life here. As you can see, we don't live in the lap of luxury. But before that Patreon group, we were really like struggling financially. So since then, and that thing has grown enough to where, man, y'all are really, I can't thank you enough for those of you who are giving your $2 or more a month to the Patreon group. I am forever in your debt, because I mean, you've made it to where we can purchase healthier food for our dogs. We can stay warmer in the winter. I get a leak in the roof, I can repair it. So thank you for that. Oh yeah, I have a Kirshner, but I'd have to put a longer post in the dowel so the Kirshner would fit. I don't know what you mean by that, Take Dead Aim, a longer post in the dowel. Can you elaborate on that? If you just mean you need a longer shank, like a longer tailpiece screw, they call it a tailpiece hanger. If you just need a longer tailpiece hanger, yeah, that's fine. But I don't make any modifications to the banjo. Don't cut that wood. Because that's my problem on my Luscombe. I want to put a Kirshner tailpiece on my Luscombe, but it won't fit the way the banjo is. I also have a really nice Oettinger tailpiece, which is the best tailpiece, and I can't get it to fit on my Luscombe. So on my Luscombe, I just use a cheap Line and Healy non-adjustable tailpiece, 1888 patent, and it's not the best tailpiece, but oh well. So Professor Luigi says, I've seen some videos by those typewriter banjoists on how to add more drive to their playing. He wasn't very convincing. How do you think one can add drive? Here's how you add drive to your playing. I mean, really, traditionally, liquor, alcohol, and just playing a lot. That'll put some drive in your picking. And really, realistically, playing with others. If you get around other musicians who are really good, they're going to force you to drive your music. So, you know, that's the best I can say for that. Oh, Dup is saying on Patreon, I recommended that he learn Bonnie George Campbell, but he can't find a version. The only time I've ever heard that song, Bascom Lamar Lunsford recorded it, and he played it on the fiddle. And he would play the fiddle melody, and then he would sing it, and then he played the melody and sang it. I don't know if you're going to be able to find, because Lunsford did like 300 recordings for the Library of Congress, so I don't know if you're going to be able to find that. You won't find it on the banjo. I have to do it. I'm going to have to do that. It's going to have to be one of the next songs I do. It's a great song, and it's easy. It's in G tuning, and it's a waltz song. I'll have to do that. Let's see here. Misty Miner says, do I recommend the Old Time Music College in Johnson City? You mean East Tennessee University? I guess East Tennessee State University. I don't know. ETSU is going to teach better music than Boone. Appalachian State University's music program is a complete joke. So if you want to take college courses on traditional music and you're in this area, I don't know. Don't waste your time taking the music course. Well, that's not true. Some of the professors at App State who teach traditional music are good, but about half of them suck. And the school doesn't respect old-time traditional music at all. They don't put any money into the programs. I'm trying to think of the one guy's name. who is really good. I don't know if he's still there or not, but you may be better off going to ETSU for that. I don't know. I've never been to ETSU. I went to App State. So Justin Gibbs asks, who are some of the overhand players that post on YouTube that you could recommend following? Are there any that you are following? Man, I can't think of anybody who posts regularly who's like a strict overhand player. Look up what's his name? Shit, his name is Zach. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name right now. Somebody knows his name. There's a guy who posts on YouTube pretty regularly. His name is Zach. I forget his last name. He plays a resonator banjo. He doesn't really play straight overhand, but he plays traditional. He's really good. I forget his last name. I'm sorry, but look, there's a guy named Zach who's really good. And then Nora Brown, her videos are all over YouTube. You know, she's a good overhand player. I don't know. I can't think of anybody else, man. Yeah, Zach. Bob Roberts just said it's Zach Sokolow. So look up Zach Sokolov or Sokolow. He's really good. He's probably one of the best ones out there who's doing YouTube videos right now. He's actually got some spirit in his shit. I would recommend Zach Sokolov or Sokolow, however you say his name. So Froze Moments says, I live 30 minutes from ETSU. It used to be very respectable, but now the local high school bluegrass classes in Unicoi County are where it's at. I believe that. I've heard mixed things about ETSU. Apparently there's a weird rivalry between East Tennessee State University and what was it, Berklee College of Music in Boston is the other one. Man, fuck those Berklee kids. I had a girlfriend who went to the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and she was kind of like, you know, kind of lame. Yeah, Vol Dynaco mentions Frank Fairfield. Yeah, you can find Frank on, but you know, Frank does not actively post on YouTube. Frank is like a Luddite almost. He's kind of he's anti old time music, which I don't blame him. Old time music is full of a bunch of assholes. And but he doesn't use the internet really. But yeah, look up Frank Fairfield. Look up John Haywood. John Haywood doesn't really post on YouTube, but you know, John Haywood, I think he still has a private Facebook group where he teaches banjo. So contact John Haywood and ask him if he'll let you in his group. I think if you send him a little bit of money, he'll give you an invite. John Haywood is a great musician. He's a great guy, great artist. Well, let's see here. So Mark Machina says, I love American musical tradition. My only bitch is the lack of drum. Outside of New Orleans, I can't find much drumming. So, I mean, that goes back to slavery, our legacy of slavery in the South here. So for those of you who don't know, I mean, of course, the African hand drums were big in the South all through the 1600s and the early 1700s. There were several violent slave rebellions. There was one in Louisiana called I think it was the German Coast Uprising in Louisiana. And there was one in South Carolina called the Stono Rebellion, where slaves rose up and killed their masters and started marching and doing military stuff and killing whites and stuff like this. And in both of those rebellions, they used hand drums to initiate the violence and to communicate between groups. And after those rebellions, hand drums were outlawed in almost the entire South. The reason that you only find traditional African drumming in Louisiana today is because Louisiana was the only Southern colony that did not outlaw African drumming after those two rebellions. Again, look at it's the German Coast Uprising and the Stono Rebellion. After that, they outlawed drumming, and so black drumming almost disappeared. But they didn't do it in New Orleans because New Orleans was different. It was a French colony, and they had a different interaction with enslaved people. There was more free blacks in New Orleans, in Louisiana. So they never outlawed drumming in Louisiana. So Mark, that's my understanding of why that is. Oh, let's see. Dup says, Clifton, what's your carry gun? Well, I don't want to get into too much of this, but this is a CZ P07. That's what I tote. I would use a Glock 19, but I like to have a hammer. Personal preference, but this is a CZ P07, 9mm. That's what I tote. Okay. So Joshua Waller says, do you use nylon or Nylgut on your Luscombe banjo? I've tried labella number 17 on a Buckbee, which was the only one I've ever tried. Which Nylguts do you prefer? Well, so Josh, the thing with labella number 17s are more historically accurate. They're closer to the gut strings that were available from circa 1885 to about 1940. The labellas are very close to that. So that's one thing to consider. Basically, if you are going to tune your banjo up to standard G, or God forbid, if you're going to play an A, you want to go with the labellas, number 17 nylon strings. But for me, I can't sing in A at all, and I really can't sing very well in G. I have to tune my banjos low to F, and you all have heard me. I'm like a broken record. You all have heard me talk about this. But if you're going to down tune the banjo to F, I highly recommend going to the Nylgut. You can down tune labellas, but they're looser, they're lighter, they're going to wobble more, they're not as comfortable, they're going to buzz maybe. So if you're going to down tune to F or E, go with the Nylguts, and I prefer the Nylgut 5B, I believe. 6B is doable; it's a little heavier, but they sell a 5B that for me is pretty close to perfect. So what I use on my Luscombe is the Aquila Nylgut 5B if I can, sometimes 6B, but 5B. And also, if you're going to use nylon strings, it's very important to get a historically correct bridge. So you want to go to Joel Hooks at banjothimble.com if you're in America. If you're in Europe, you want to go to cliffordessex.net and get a bridge from them. Well, Dup says he prefers, he's using a Beretta 92 compact and prefers the hammer. Well, Dup, that's because you was in the Marine Corps, right, buddy? So of course, I was raised up on the Beretta 92 in the Army. I was a tanker, so we used the 92. It had a safety and the external hammer. I don't want a safety on any of my carry guns anymore, but I do want that double action hammer. I don't like the Glock where you rack around and you've got the striker back with no safety, and it's over your dick. It's how I carry it down my front. I don't, and they say, oh, you don't like that because you're not trained. Like, yeah, okay. I just prefer the double action hammer and no safety. So that's why I don't carry a Beretta or a 1911 or anything like that, because I don't want the external safety. I just want a double action hammer. That's all I need. Molly says her Red Ryder BB gun will put a hole right through a can. I shit you not. It will. Well, we got some guns in here. Oh, so Dup says he converted his 92 to decocker only. That's very tempting, Dup. I don't even know. I'm not that much of a gun guy, but I would carry a compact 92 that was decocker only. That's awesome. I like that. I like this. The CZP07 is a good gat. They get, some people love them, some people don't, but I haven't had any issues with mine. I've shot it. I don't know. I've only shot it maybe 500 times since I had it, and I never had a problem with it. So Acta Sanctorum says more Leatherstocking content. I'm sorry if you've already answered. Nobody's asked about Old Leatherstocking, believe it or not, which is devastating to me. I'm shocked. But yeah, there will be. We'll have Old Leatherstocking come back on the program. I don't know when. I don't want to overdo him too much because I don't want that to be like my thing. But we will have Old Leatherstocking. He will ride again. He will be back. Don't you worry. If anybody has what I need for Old Leatherstocking, he likes to sing, death-related music. So I do need suggestions, songs that are about, sort of grim reaper, satanic, devil, dark kind of spooky stuff. I'd like to do that. And he can perform anytime. It doesn't have to be Halloween or whatever. Get a Grip says Leatherstocking is too creepy. Yeah, that motherfucker is too creepy. So Skin Hat keeps asking me about Houston rap, specifically Pimp C and DJ Screw. Buddy, I've never, I hate to sound like the quintessential cracker, but I ain't never heard of either of them two boys before. I don't know shit about rap, or Houston rap for sure. I'm sorry. The most I know is I know about Killer Mike because he's from Atlanta. Other than that, I don't know. I don't keep up with any of them boys. Oh, so Eli says, as someone who also plays in drop tunings, usually an E, do you have any thoughts on longer scale necks? Have you made any banjos with extended necks? Eli, yes, I have. You'll be interested to know, Eli, a lot of the early banjos, like pre-1860, what we call minstrel banjos today, they had really long necks. They'd often have a 13-inch diameter pot and a really long, like 28-inch scale neck or more. I find that anything over about 27, 28 inches starts to get uncomfortable on your shoulder to play that far out. But if you want to play in those low tunings, the longer neck will help. I would recommend getting a Seeger style banjo, a Seeger long neck that's got the 3 extra frets. I think those are great. I've only ever played a couple, but I like those. Yeah, my only caution, if you're going to build or buy a long neck banjo and you're going to play it open all the way out, don't get one that's so crazy long that it hurts your shoulder. And also, if you have to crane your neck up and look that far to look at the fingerboard, that can be really uncomfortable too. So just some stuff to keep in mind, Eli, with long necks. Oh yeah, Liam Neary suggests I should do I'm Dying Mother with Old Leatherstocking. Yeah, that'd be great. Rise Up 144 says, "Do you know John Hardy?" Yeah, I do. John Hardy is I've never really worked up a version that I was really happy with, so I've never recorded John Hardy. But it's one that needs to be done. It's an important song in the repertoire. Some of the best versions you'll find of John Hardy that are just real down home, true blue, is on that Alan Lomax Kentucky Recordings website. Go there and look up, search songs by title or whatever. Look up John Hardy. You'll find some good versions of John Hardy. Hello from New York City. Howdy, howdy. Oh yeah, Angel of Death. Yeah, Chris Kamen is recommending I do Angel of Death. That's a Hank Williams song. I've had several people say I should do the Angel of Death by Hank Williams as an Old Leatherstocking piece. So I may do something like that. That's a good song. So Aaron Abling says, I have trouble keeping my good time in tune while playing in lower tunings. Do you have any advice? Aaron, it sounds like you maybe just need to tighten up the tuners. You can take a screwdriver to the back of those tuners and you can increase the tension on them. That may be all you need to do. There shouldn't be any problems with it if it's a new banjo. Maybe if you're going to play exclusively in lower tunings, I don't know. People recommend using heavy strings. I've never used, with steel strings, I've only ever used straight medium gauge steel strings. There's no reason to use heavy gauge steel strings. And the only reason to use light gauge steel strings is if you want to put steel strings on a delicate antique banjo, which you shouldn't be doing anyway. So really, for most people using steel strings on modern banjos, you want to just stick with medium gauge. There's no reason to go with the heavier the lights. So Jesse Hawks says, what's the best way to ship a banjo overseas? The Army is sending me to Korea for 9 months, and I want to know how I can ship one over. Jesse, it's not a problem. I mean, you're going to have an APO address over there. Just order it, and they'll send it. I just mailed an antique banjo to an APO in Germany, I think. And it takes a little longer. The APO system is clogged up right now more than usual because of the coronavirus. But I just shipped an antique 1913 banjo to an APO in Germany, and the guy got it no problem. So what you need to do, Jesse, is just once you get your address in Korea, go ahead and order something cheap. I recommend getting a Recording King Dirty 30s for about $200. And anybody who sells banjos in the mail, they will have no problem shipping to your APO address. It won't be a problem. So Sam Hatch says, I need to replace the bridge on my Deering 5-string. Any advice? You want to get, I mean, if you want to improve the sound of that steel string banjo, you want to get a nicer bluegrass banjo, or nicer bluegrass bridge that has the ebony cap going along the top, 3-legged with maple with the ebony cap. Just make sure you get a brand name bridge. Get like a Snuffy Smith bridge, or get a Bart Ryder bridge. You can order these from places like elderly.com. Just get a nice bluegrass bridge. Don't go for any of the fancy, all that crazy stuff. Just get a nice quality bluegrass bridge that has a name brand stamped on it, and you'll be fine on that, Sam. So Rise Up 144 says, I'm getting into playing an ancient flute from the Altai region. I don't know where that is. And I want to incorporate banjo as well as throat singing with the banjo. What do you think of mixing musical traditions? Well, Rise Up, I say go for it. That's great. What am I, when I paint myself up like a skeleton and I play an English folk song like Death and the Lady using a 5-string American banjo and this rustic redneck 2-finger picking that I learned, I'm doing the same thing you're doing. I'm mixing musical traditions. So I think it's great. And however you want to do it, you should at least experiment with it. So Chris Kamen says, what is your preferred tuning for all applications? I don't, it's hard to say. I know probably 14 or 15 traditional tunings. I only really regularly use maybe 5 or 6 tunings. One of my favorite, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what my favorite tunings are. I really like F sharp D, G, A, D. I really like double C. And one thing I can tell you all right now, a free tip from me, is that any song that you can play in double C, G, C, G, C, D, you can also play it and it'll sound great in the old Rubin tuning, which is F sharp D, F sharp A, D. Those tunings, believe it or not, are a mated pair. They're closely related. So anything you can play in double C, you can play in that drop D Rubin tuning, F sharp D, F sharp A, D. My favorite go-to tuning is probably what people call Doc Boggs tuning, F sharp D, G, A, D. That's probably my favorite tuning. Like you'll notice that's what I went to when I wanted to play Death and the Lady. I went to F sharp D, G, A, D. When I wanted to work out an arrangement to Cotton Eye Joe, I went to F sharp D, G, A, D. So anybody that if you follow my music closely, you'll see that that's my favorite tuning. Oh, Rise Up 144 asks me if what I think about Bill Smakula. Yeah, go with Smakula. He's probably the best one on the internet who you can actually, he'll be quick. You can send something to him and turn around. I deal with Smakula frequently, and he's a good guy. He's in West Virginia. He's a really good luthier. He has a big inventory of antique banjos. He's an honest guy. He's fast. If you order something from Bill, or Bob, it's Bob Smakula. If you order something from Bob Smakula, he almost always ships it out the same day to you. And he's very honest and he gives you the best price he can. So I always recommend Bob Smakula. So his website is smakula.com. I think that's how you pronounce it. SMAKULEULA.com, smakula.com. I would always recommend Bob Smakula. If you're in the Asheville area, if you happen to be in Asheville, North Carolina, or that area, you can look up Bob Dillen. Not Bob Dylan. Jack Dillen is his name, Jack Dillen. And he spells his last name Dillen. So if you're in the North Carolina, Asheville area, you can go with Jack Dillen. He's really great. He doesn't sell a lot of instruments, but he's very good luthier and he's very fast and he's very honest. So go with Jack Dillen or Bob Smakula. So Matthew Govig, another one of my students. Hey, Matthew. Matthew says, I got a good gourd and it's dried out pretty good. What are some things you found out during one of your builds that you wished you knew before? So Matthew, when you go to make cuts on that gourd to make your banjo, the first cut you want to make is your sound hole where you're going to put your skin head. Cut that first because that's the most forgiving hole. Go ahead and cut that first, and then you can lay the gourd flat on that cutout sound hole. Then determine where you're going to set your neck, how you're going to make your cut for your neck, because it's not until you've cut your sound hole that you know where your neck needs to go. You see what I'm saying? So cut your sound hole first, then lay the gourd flat on the sound hole, and then determine how you're going to mount your neck to it. That's the best piece of advice I can give you on making gourd banjos. Hell yeah. Hey, Heron Wagner, you're making a fiddle for your sister. What's up, Heron? Get a Grip asks if I give lessons. I'm kind of overwhelmed. I'm doing this. I have this archaeology contract I'm working, which keeps me pretty busy in the daytime. And I'm very limited on students that I can take on one-on-one. I try to keep it to younger people living in the South. Um, so I'm not really taking one-on-one students right now. I would refer you to my Patreon group, which is pretty close to one-on-one. But I'm very limited to how many students I can actually take on. So Professor Luigi says, are you working on learning any new styles of banjo, or are you mainly focusing on refining what you have? Yeah, Luigi, at this point, I'm not really, maybe I will in the future, but I'm not really actively trying to learn new styles at this point. I mean, I play overhand, I play the, two finger, and I play up picking. And up picking, I really have two different styles of up picking. So really that's like, I mean, I play, about four traditional styles right there. So I'm not really, and I can pick guitar a little bit. So I'm not really trying. I should. I'd like to be able to play three finger picking like Doc Boggs or Virgil. These. I'd like to do a vernacular three finger style. It'd be the only one I'd want to learn. But at this point, I'm kind of overwhelmed with what I've got going on already. So no, I'm not actively trying to learn anything. So Rise Up 144 says, you ever find any cool artifacts on your archaeological endeavors? Yeah, sure, all the time. Most of archaeology is not finding anything. Most of archaeology is confirming that there's nothing there. But I've worked on some really amazing sites in the past. I've worked on burial mounds in North Carolina. I've worked in caves in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Arkansas, caves where they were just full of artifacts laying on top of the ground, like grinding stones where they ground their corn and stuff. Some of the cooler stuff. When I worked in Jamaica, I found some really cool stuff in Jamaica. The job I'm doing right now doesn't involve any digging. We're just doing GPS mapping and photography of these old early 1800s sunken roadbeds that were used as part of the Trail of Tears in 1838 to remove the Cherokee out of North Georgia and East Tennessee. So what I'm doing now is I'm hiking. I have to locate these historic roadbeds. They're just in the middle of the woods too, so they can be difficult to locate. And then I have to hike them from miles, and I have to take photographs and GPS points along the way. So we're really, at this point, we're just trying to build up a map of what has survived of the Trail of Tears in our area, which to me it's besides being really interesting work, it's a major honor to be a part of the project. Jacob Bernard is asking me if I know about any grants that are available to support ethnomusicology studies. I don't off the top of my head, but I know that they exist because I know that there's kids out there who are getting grants to do the kind of work that I'm doing. So I don't know off the top of my head, Jacob, but I know those grants exist. And so if you can find out about them, tell me about them. I need to get a grant. So BK says, what is the oldest artifact you've found? Pretty frequently in the Southeast, we find stuff from the Archaic period. The Archaic period is roughly about 4,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago. That's a very common in the Southeast. So I've found artifacts that are 4, 5, 6,000 years old pretty regularly. The oldest artifact I ever found was an early Archaic period spear point I found in Arkansas, and it was just laying on the surface on the ground in a cave. It probably washed out or something, but it was just laying on the surface when I found it, and it was a spear point made of black flint, black chert we would call it, that was a good 10 or 11,000 years old. So that's the oldest artifact I've ever found, about 10,000 years old. spear point. Idaho Duck Hunter is asking about that left-hand pull-off technique I do. I call that the double shuffle. So Idaho Duck Hunter, you're going to have to get on YouTube and type in Clifton Hicks double shuffle. It's also called an open string pull-off. There's other names for it, but the way I do it, I call it the double shuffle. So look up Clifton Hicks double shuffle. I have a video, or maybe 2 videos even, where I explain how to do that technique. So Eli Acevedo says, have you ever made a neck and dowel stick out of one piece of wood, or are they always separate? What advice do you have for getting the right neck angle? Okay, so Eli, the earliest banjos were all one piece. The dowel and the neck were one piece. I'm making one right now that's that way. It's easier to, once you get used to it, it's easier and it can be cheaper to make them 2 pieces, where you drill a hole and you glue the dowel into the heel, into a socket, into the neck. And how to get the appropriate neck angle, that's easy, because I've now, historically, early banjos had no neck angle. They were flat. They had a 0-degree neck angle. Banjos, 5-string banjos, did not have neck angle until about the 1930s. And it did not become standard until after World War II. When Earl Scruggs came on the scene, he played a Gibson banjo that had neck angle, and that took over as the standard. But anything before 1930, if you're going for a traditional, like a folk banjo or a minstrel banjo or a gourd banjo, it should not have, it doesn't have to have neck angle. Historically, they had no neck angle. And historically, they were one piece, dowel and neck. You know, early banjos were. Whew. Well, everybody, we've got 110 people in here. I know it's going good, but my throat is starting to get sore. I'm out of beer. I think I'm going to wrap this up. I would appreciate it. Everybody who's in here would give this a thumbs up. That would just get more people to look at it. But I am going to leave. My throat's starting to get sore, y'all, and it's 9 o'clock here. It's getting close to my bedtime. I really appreciate everybody coming in here. Thanks a lot. I know I didn't give you any notice. I just run these live streams. So I'm sorry about not giving any notice. But I really appreciate everybody being in here, and thank you for the thumbs up. Okay, I'm going to dip out, y'all. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I love doing this. Y'all have a good evening wherever you are. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a pleasant company for me. Okay.